Well, I'm going to just jump in here before I actually call the meeting to order. And for those who are coming on board, I would like to say that we continue to abide by the governor's executive order and due to the coronavirus. And so we are still doing our meetings teleconferencing. The meeting can be viewed on the agenda page, which is located on the main page of the district's website. Public comments or questions can be submitted to the following email address, publiccomment@vwd.org. All written comments, pardon me, that are received at least 90 minutes before the meeting will be provided to the board, and a record of the receipt of comment will be noted during the meeting. Members of the public who are viewing the meeting via the Zoom video conferencing platform can express their desire to provide input at the appropriate time by utilizing the raise hand function. GM Pruem will be monitoring this, and will you please bear with us if we miss you and speak up if you need to be spoken to, speak to us. Additional instructions for online participation will be posted on the district's website, www.vwd.org/meetings. And with that, I would like to call to order the meeting for a regular meeting of the Board of Directors of Vallecitos Water District for Wednesday, August 19, 2020. We'll begin with roll call. Director Elitharp.
Present.
Thank you. Director Hernandez.
Present.
Thank you. Director Sinella.
Present.
Director Martin.
Present.
Thank you both. And I'm here, so we're all here and ready to go. At this point, there may be, we need to decide about a possible change to our agenda schedule. Item 2.1, which is regarding the CWA regular conveyance system, will be moved to the last item in the agenda, if it sounds appropriate with you all, so that we can be sure that presentations for the staff is also available at the same time. Or if you prefer, we can put them on first and do the staff at a separate session at the end of the action items. So I'm just going to ask you if you have a preference to having it all together at the end or divided. And I don't know if anyone has any comments to make or add to that decision making, so I may just be calling your names.
Hey, President Evans, I'm okay with switching it so long as the presenters that are here right now are okay with that. We don't want if they have a scheduling conflict coming up, then we don't want to lose them later on.
Absolutely, good suggestion. Director Elitharp. Oh, Dr. Dan, Mr. Dan, did you want to make a comment? You're good either way? All right.
Yes.
Okay. Director Elitharp, did you have an opinion?
I don't have a preference, whatever works for everybody.
All right. Director Hernandez.
I'm the same. I don't care one way or the other.
And Director Martin. I guess he doesn't have an opinion. So then in that case, I would prefer that we move them to be the last item in the action item list. I think it would be good to have it done together in that order. So we will be moving item 2.1 to the end of the action item list. And now we need to adopt a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved, Sinella.
Thank you, Director Sinella. Can I have a second, please?
Second, Hernandez.
Thank you, Director Hernandez. Roll call vote. Director Hernandez.
Here.
Director Elitharp.
Yes.
Director Sinella.
Yes.
Director Martin.
Present.
Is that a yes vote as well?
Yes.
Okay, and a yes from me, so it's been moved and seconded and unanimously voted. Now we're ready for a public comment. I'm wondering if you have any GM Pruem. at this
No,
time?
nobody attending has expressed a desire to make a public comment.
And you didn't get any paperwork in earlier?
Yeah, as of 3:30, which is our cutoff time, we didn't receive any emails with comments from the public either.
Okay, great. So now we'll move on to presentations. Am I on the right? We have with Chris Robbins.
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to take that item, President Evans. So we do have a safety award to give away today. Aqua JPIA has a program for safety. It's called the HR LaBounty Safety Award Program, and it was designed for all Aqua JPIA members, of which we are one, as a way to promote safe workplace behavior and operational practices while rewarding those employees who demonstrate safe behavior, take part in recognizable proactive activities, or participate in risk-reducing actions. And it gives members another way to foster a safety culture that reduces the potential for losses. 8 Vallecitos employees were honored by Aqua JPIA for their confined space rescue training, which was coordinated with local fire agencies in November of last year. You may remember we shared the video of that fire training with the board. The goal of that training was to heighten safety awareness and improve procedures in confined space entry and rescue during real-world situations. And it took a real high level of coordination to bring in the fire department personnel, and they conducted 12 days of joint training. So it was our folks and a lot of folks from the fire departments, and it was really successful. So wastewater treatment plant supervisor, Dawn McDougall, senior wastewater treatment plant operator, Matt Weiss, wastewater treatment plant operators 1, Chris Deering, Evan Magura, Arturo Sanchez, and Mark Smith, and safety technician Annette Longville, and public information officer Alicia Yerman were all recognized for their roles in organizing and conducting the training. All 13 members of the Vallecitos Water District's wastewater collection system crew actually participated in the training as well. And we had fire department crews from Carlsbad, San Marcos, Del Mar, Vista, Escondido, Oceanside, Encinitas, Solana Beach, Rancho Santa Fe, Valley Center, and crews from North County Fire in Fallbrook, San Pasqual, Rincon, and Camp Pendleton. So you could tell it was a huge turnout. Aqua really saw the value in it, and they decided that it was eligible for the HR LaBounty Safety Award. And here tonight to receive the reward on behalf of staff are, I think it's Chris Robbins is here and Dawn's here. So President Evans, I'll turn it over to you if you wanted to say anything or ask for Chris or Dawn to say anything.
Well, I'd love to hear from Dawn, or you, Chris, but this is really impressive. I remember the video. That was quite an ordeal, and I used to think I'd really love to get in one of those hazmat suits just to try it, and that certainly changed my mind. So I had no idea it involved that many industry people with all the, and I'm assuming we were not the only district doing this, or was it just us?
I think we coordinated it, and I'll look to Dawn, if Dawn or Chris, if they want to pipe in and add a little bit more texture to the
Wow.
conversation.
Yes, Dawn.
I know the fire department, they use various sites every year, so they have training in different situations, different circumstances. So our plant, the Metal Arc facility, was chosen. They chose this site for their annual training that they do for confined space. They do it all over, but in that year, we were the only site that was working with the fire department.
Wow, well, really impressive. That's fantastic. Is there anything you'd like to say to your 13 member?
Well, everybody they worked hard. It was a tough week because we were involved in the training. We were taking the different groups of firefighters around, talking about our confined spaces, talking about how we would respond and how we would coordinate our response. So it was ongoing. It was constantly, we had one of us that was working directly with the fire department for those 12 weeks. We were rotating that. So it was a busy week, and everybody did really well, and they got a lot out of it. And there was a little competition between the different inland and coastal firefighters. They wanted to know who did better in the training. So it was a good exercise. It really was.
Well, how often do we need to do that? Go into those confined spaces?
Well, for the collections crew, they need it every year annually. They have to have refresher training. So it was good here to have the training here because they were able to look at the treatment plant, and if they ever had to respond here, they would know what our conditions are, what we had down here. Like I said, we discussed about different scenarios they might have to what confined spaces they would have to enter, the different scenarios that they would be involved in, like going into a filter or having to go into some of our wet wells here, or if we were down cleaning one out and someone had some issues down there and they had to do a rescue. So,
Well, sorry about my dogs. I really know, I know the board and all of us really appreciate what those people are doing for us. I don't think most of us realize how serious some of the positions that we put people in to maintain our water and wastewater services. So thank you very much for that. Board members, would any of you like to express any comments?
I just wanted to say great job, everybody. I saw some of the social media around this as well, in addition to the video that you showed at the last meeting. And it's just a wonderful endeavor to put safety first, and we just would appreciate it. So thank you.
Very nicely said. Thank you, Director Sanella.
Director
Anyone
Martin?
else? Yes, Director Martin.
Yeah, Don, thank you very much and your crew. It's amazing the things you do day in and day out. And that's just added keeping safety is number one. Thank you very much.
Well said.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
President Evans, I
Oh,
attended
Dr.
the,
Lothar.
yeah,
Yes.
I attended the Aqua JPIA board meeting on July 27th, and I was pleasantly surprised to see this item on their agenda. So congratulations to everybody. Don, Conveyor, thanks to everybody.
Very nice.
thank you, I will.
Okay. Anyone else?
I will just add, good job. Keep up the good work. And we don't want you to go, Dawn.
Well said there too, Director Hernandez. Well, thank you, Don. Please, like Director Snell and Director Elithar said, please convey our appreciation and our pride in the organization. Congratulations. It's really
Well, thank
exciting.
you. I will pass that on to staff, and this whole district makes it hard to leave. So, but I will pass all that information and I'll let staff know. They did do a great job.
So may I ask you when you're leaving
Tentatively, it looks like at the end of next year.
next year? Oh, well, we have time to convince you otherwise. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, then we'll move on to the next item, which is our consent calendar. Does anyone have any changes or comments on the consent calendar? Otherwise, I'd need a motion to approve.
Move to approve, Martin.
Thank you, Director Martin. Second, please.
Second, Sanella.
Thank you, Director Sanella. It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent calendar as posted. Those in favor will answer via roll call. Director Elithar,
Yes.
Director Hernandez,
Yes?
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Sanella.
Yes.
Thank you, and I will say yes as well. So we're done. We're now going to move on to item 2.2.
Yeah, so President Evans, I'll jump into that in a second, but before I do, I did want to point out that our two consultants for item 2.1 have joined us. So I'd like to let them know that the agenda was rescheduled so that their item will be last, but items 2.2 and 2.3 are relatively quick. So we think we'll be to the regional conveyance item in short order. So
All right, thank you for letting me know that.
yeah, so you're welcome. So item 2.2 is Buena. It's a update on the status of the Buena cross tie project, and we want to share with the board kind of an interesting project we had recently, and I think Susan's going to take the lead on this one.
Actually, General Manager Prum, I'll take the lead on it, and this is for authorization for the emergency repair.
Okay.
So I'll try and keep it quick. There's a short presentation. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So there's a short presentation along with a quick video, but let me start out. So this is the outfall repair that from basically that happened over the spring, early summer of this year. Let's see, advance this. Okay. So as the board is aware, the outfall, land outfall conveys wastewater from our district area to Encina. It's roughly 8 miles long, and it includes siphon or gravity sections and various pipe materials and also sizes. The eastern portion, which is basically from our district all the way to El Camino Real, is solely owned and operated by Vallecitos. The western portion from El Camino Real all the way to Encina is owned by Vallecitos, but both Buena and the city of Buena Sanitation District and the city of Carlsbad have capacity ownership in it, and there's cost sharing agreements associated with it. Now here's just a quick overview of that system, real simple. This is the main outfall line. El Camino Real is here. Within that same corridor, it's only about a 20-foot basically easement. We also have our fail-safe line, and then Buena actually has another line that comes through here also. So it's fairly crowded in that area. So, okay, so emergency repair. So during the April rains, which are significant, I believe regionally we had somewhere between 5 to 7 inches of rain in a 5-day period, which is almost unheard of. We had several issues in our sewer system and our fail-safe system. And so did many other agencies across the county. After the rain subsided, our staff went ahead and started checking areas that were susceptible to see if, maybe there was a failure, because if there was a failure on the system, it would create environmental damage. They actually discovered that one of the manholes was in dire need of repair. So looking at that area, looking at where it was located, we hired Cast Construction, and we selected them because they had the experience. We had prior experience with them with the quality work, and they also had the ability to mobilize in this area. I'm going to show a quick video, and you could see it was a difficult area to mobilize. We actually had to build a bridge to cross a stream to get into this area within a protected environmental zone. The other thing that we did on this job is we looked at different methods. Instead of digging up the manhole and replacing it, we looked at a polymer concrete insert, which basically eliminated the need for us to dig up the ground. So really quick, just kind of orientate you. Here's kind of our outfall fail-safe in the Buena line. Where you see my cursor here, that's actually the parking lot for Legoland, and this is Costco, obviously Encina, the 5 freeway and Palomar Airport Road. Zooming up on that here, you can actually see the lines. These are just graphical in nature, but this is only about a 20-foot corridor. You have our fail-safe, the Buena line, and our line, and this little red dot. That's the manhole that was near failure. So with that, I'll kind of let the video do most of the talking, and I'll finish up after the video.
Hi, my name is John Childs. I'm with the Vallecitos Water District Construction Inspection Department. We're out here on a job that we're calling the Buena Vista Cross Tie, right off Palomar Airport Road in an environmentally sensitive creek that runs essentially behind the Costco, if you're familiar with that. We are rehabbing a manhole that was after these last intense rains in last April. We were concerned about the actual structure failing, so we decided to be proactive and take this on as an emergency project. The ramifications if this manhole ever did fail would be the sewer spill would go straight down this creek and directly to the ocean. So that was one of the reasons why we put a high priority on this particular job. City of Vista has been gracious as far as allowing us to be in the shared easement with them. Has also reached out to say, hey, if we needed to take some flow from your line, Vallecitos, we would go ahead and take that, which was very gracious of them. We're also working in conjunction with the city of Carlsbad, as this is considered the city of Carlsbad. Had to get traffic control and right-of-way permits from them just to unload the equipment off of Palomar Airport Road. Once we got inside of our easement, we really didn't need them other than, like today, we set up the traffic control again because this job is on the 30-inch outfall sewer, which is basically the main drain for all of San Marcos. This line feeds directly into the Encina wastewater treatment plant that's probably less than a mile from here out of the coast.
This is the structure that we're concerned about. The hydrogen sulfide gases have eaten from the inside out, have eaten the concrete away to where the concrete is susceptible to just falling in on. This whole area, when we get a lot of rain, will actually flood, and we have infiltration going into these lids.
As you can see, the concrete, that's the original concrete structure right here, is really chewed away, and that's what we were concerned about failing. You can actually see the very first shaft that we put in. That will be what I call the manhole within the manhole. This morning we got an early start. Contractor and myself started at 3 o'clock in the morning. The reason why we did that was to take advantage of the lower flows the sewer sees. Typically they spike in the afternoon, and then at around 4 o'clock in the morning lately they've been trending to be quite low, enough that we were able to do the work. The work that we were trying to perform this morning was to coat the channel of the manhole itself to get as low down into the water line as possible. Put in what we call a flow-through bypass plug that then will allow us to dry up the actual concrete channel. Once it was dry, we were able to put on the two-part epoxy all the way down into the flow line. Once we remove the plug, that water will come up and it'll be above the epoxy paint line. So that was the reason why we started this morning. We'll do this on occasion on different sewer projects, take advantage of the low flows for different reasons, whether it be rechanneling or doing something along these lines. What we've decided to do, instead of replacing the manhole, we've come across a technology from Armor Rock where we can actually build a manhole within the old manhole. So we wound up taking the top off of the old manhole, rehabbing the bottom base, as we call it, and sealing that base, and then we are adding the shafting inside of the old shafting. Thereby we didn't really have to do any excavation. If you turn around, the biggest job, one of this whole projects, was just building this bridge that's behind us right here, just to get over this creek and have the equipment and have the materials travel over the creek without affecting waterways of America and the environmental problems that come with this area as far as the coastal development. This manhole, part of our 30-inch in diameter pipe, makes a hard right, or a 90-degree right, essentially right here. And what that does is it causes the water to be disturbed, and that causes extra sewer gases, hydrogen sulfide gases. The hydrogen sulfide gases is actually what causes the concrete to fail like it does. Where it runs right through, you don't have nearly the violent water churning, which is a much less hydrogen sulfide gas. So this one in particular is just known to be a weak link, if you will, although it's lasted many, many years. Its shelf life is due, and we need to be proactive and get it fixed. Total duration of this job has been roughly 3 weeks. Today's June the 2nd. We hope to be completely out of here by the end of this week. The manhole will essentially be done today, and then it's going to be restoration, tearing down the bridge, and demobilizing all of this equipment, making this area all pretty again.
So with that, the total cost of the repairs were a little bit over $90,000. That included a little bit over $81,000 for cast construction, the rest of the materials that the district supplied, and some staff time. The City of Carlsbad and Buena Sanitation District are, per agreement, will reimburse the district roughly 24% and 18% respectively, totaling about almost $38,000. So unless there's any other questions, staff recommends the board approve payment of cast construction for an amount of $81,713.24. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from the board?
Move to approve.
It's been moved to approve. There's a second, please.
Second, Hernandez.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we accept the staff's recommendation and approve the payment to cast construction in the amount of $82,000. Not in specifics. Okay. And roll call vote. Director Hernandez?
Yes.
Director Elitharp?
Yes.
Director Martin?
Yes.
And Director Sinella?
Yes.
I'll say yes also, so it passes unanimously. And I would like to just say, James, thanks for a very quick and tidy presentation. And then, wow, what a great video. That was phenomenal. So will you pass that on to John Childs and all the people involved, and probably Alicia if she was involved in that? Excellent. Has that been posted on our web and I've missed it? Probably so.
Thank you, President Evans. Yes, and I did forget to mention that video was done by in-house staff, and I don't know if it has already been posted on social media or not.
It was posted on social media. It was really good. Got a great response.
Yeah, I had no idea that Manholes did that, and you could do that. It was just amazing. So thank you, and thank Cass Construction as well. All right, moving on to 2.2, 2.3, the COVID financial reporting presentation, which is on page 85 in our packets.
Yeah, I'll kick that item off, President Evans. So the board will remember when we went through the budget process, there were significant concerns expressed about the COVID impacts on district finances. So what we committed to do is provide the board with monthly updates that track certain metrics that would indicate whether our planning was appropriate for the impacts that we actually see. So with that, I'll turn it over to Wes and Mike Arthur and Alicia Saavedra will be presenting the updates on the financials. So Wes, go ahead.
Good evening, President Evans, members of the board. Tonight I'll be presenting on the COVID-19 financial plan update for July 31st, 2020, which is the first month in fiscal year 2021. So we're finally here. We finally get to see how, at least start looking at our budget plan and how it compares to actuals. It's only 1 month, but at least we don't have to keep saying that we don't have a budget yet. So I'll keep it short as well because I know we got time constraints and you do see this frequently. So I'll go through it quickly, but if you have questions, feel free to ask. So as you recall, we committed to presenting actual versus budget compared to our fiscal year 2021 budget COVID-19 financial plan. So we have our first month of actuals for tonight. So we'll be doing actual versus budget and historical and current trends for water sales, water purchases, delinquency charges, lock charges, and bad debt expense. And Mike Arthur is actually going to kick it off and start talking about water sales and water purchases. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Wes. Good evening, President Evans, member of the board. Get to that next slide, Wes, real quick. So as Wes mentioned, we're only 1 month into the fiscal year, so there's not that much data to present. And so what I can state is that the most remarkable data is that there is no remarkable data. So what that means is that there's nothing surprising so far. The greatest impact that we've seen is basically due to the warmer weather. We have seen some COVID impacts on our commercial industrial customer base, which isn't surprising. So what I wanted to show you, this is what we've always shown. We've broken the customer, grouped them into 4 different categories: residential, irrigation, agricultural, and in our commercial industrial. That's for our sales. And remember that sales are 1 month, at least 1 month delay. So what I'm reporting in July is mainly June usage. For our production, our purchases, the purchases are purchased and billed in July. So there really is no delay in the purchase numbers that you will see. So we go to the next slide. So this is a chart that's showing, represents the sales of the 4 customer groups for the month of July of 2020. And it shows the percentage breakdown of our sales. And we know that the biggest impact for COVID is going to be on our commercial, industrial, and other group. And they do make up.
Mike,
yes.
You're fading in and out a wee bit, for me anyway. So
maybe if I take out my headphones and try talking without that. So hopefully you can hear me a little bit better.
Oh, thank you much.
Oh, okay. So our commercial, industrial, and other are going to be the greatest impact from COVID demands, and they do make up a little bit less than 10% of our customer sales. So if we go to the next slide, Wes. So this slide shows the July water sales by customer groups for the past 3 years. And you'll notice that all categories are up from last fiscal year, except for the last category, the commercial industrial. So overall, we're up about 13.7%, which can be better shown on the next slide. I'll show you that. So this is July of fiscal year 2020, which is July of 2019. So last year we sold about 1,200 acre feet of water compared to this fiscal year of about 1,362 acre feet of water. So we are, as I mentioned, we are up about 13.7%. So climate really seems to dictate the overall sales more than COVID has so far. And this year was slightly warmer than last year. Therefore, we can see a spike in the outdoor watering. It's suggested by the gains in the irrigation and agricultural customers. We do see the decrease in commercial, industrial, and other of about 15%, which again is not unexpected. Our purchases are about 5% higher than they were last year. And remember, purchases are for that month. So, and since sales are delayed, the purchase amount is really kind of an indicator of probably what next month's sales will be. So probably we'll see about a 5% increase in sales for next month. So on the next slide, this is basically the same slide setup, but rather than just show 1 month, I wanted to show a 4-month time period. And that 4 months is from April through July. And I picked those months because that's really March through June usage, which is pretty much corresponds to when COVID really showed the greatest impact. So again, as I mentioned, there were slightly warmer months than last year. So therefore we'll see the spike in the outdoor watering, as we can see in the gains from this year to last year. So last year there's about 3,874 acre feet sold, and this year about 4,100 acre feet. So overall for that 4-month COVID timeframe, which I'll refer to, about a 5.8% gain. So how does that compare to what we thought in the budget? Well, we estimated about a 4% overall decrease in demand. So the good news is we are showing a 5.8% increase in demand. And again, that's mainly weather driven. The outdoor watering, the irrigation and agriculture were up about 10 and 7% respectively. Our residential, we anticipated about 5% increase because people are home more, washing their hands, doing more laundry. We did notice a 10% increase. And again, part of that is probably partial outdoor watering. I know I'm watering my garden a little bit more to keep them going. So, and then for the same time period, our purchases are up about 2%. So I think that, do you have one more? Okay, that's really all I have to present. Like Wes mentioned, that we are only 1 month into the fiscal year. We will be tracking this. The greatest thing that I can take from this is weather plays a bigger impact right now than COVID, except for there is a decreased demand as expected in the commercial, industrial, and other groups. So unless there's any questions, I will turn it back over to Wes.
Are there any questions, gentlemen?
No.
Yes?
No. Wes, back to you then.
Thank you, Mike.
Okay.
Okay, so the next slide is we actually introduced this slide at the last meeting. This is the billing timeline in days. And the purpose of this slide is just to kind of give you, to clarify the delay between the time usage occurs and when we might charge late fees, lock charges, and bad debt expense. So if we look at this, if a customer starts their usage in April, they'll get their bill about, the usage ends 30 days and they get their bill 32 days later on May 3rd or so. They'll be officially delinquent 52 days later on May 23rd, and then we'll charge a late fee on May 30th, about almost 60 days after the usage, 60 days after usage begins. Then we will lock them about 92 days later, and finally they will go to bad debt expense about 120 days after the beginning of usage. So that's just to give you an idea. There's about a 4-month delay between bad debt and the beginning of usage, 3-month for locks, and a 2-month delay for late fees. So I'm going to talk about those 3 categories. So that's why I just wanted to show you that graphically. So this next slide, this is the difficult slide that I presented last time, and unfortunately it's going to get a little more complicated this time, so I'll give it a shot again. And hopefully, and then once again, I want to give kudos to customer service for this program. But this is the number of requested fee waivers. So for April, it was 172 total. For May, that number went up to 176. It came down to 100 for June. And then in July, it's actually down to 66. So what this shows is not only the number of fee waivers, but what we need to remember is we are not waiving late fees unless customers call in and say they've been impacted by COVID and then we request documentation. And if they provide that documentation, we put them in a program that we call special care, and they stay in that program until we followed up with them and taken them out of the program or they request to be taken out. So the 69 customers in April that were in special care would have carried forward, but now in July, we've actually followed up with some of those customers, and 33 of them have been taken out of special care now. So now we've actually reduced the number of fee waivers for July. So that's why that number is down so drastically. So if anything, we're showing a little bit of recovery there from COVID and not an increase. So this next slide are the fee waivers in dollars per month due to COVID. So you can see in March, we waived $161. That number went up to $871 in May, and now it's actually down to $540 for July. So again, no major impacts there. Next slide is the number of delinquent accounts, and this shows the last 5 months with 3-year comparison over those 5 months. And again, there's really not much to show here. If anything, in July, you can see the number of delinquent accounts is down to 1,124 as compared to 1,458 last year in July. The next slide are the delinquency charges year to date. So this is year to date. It's just 1 month for fiscal year 2021. And it's important to note that for the delinquency charges for the budget, we budgeted to receive only 30% of what we would normally receive for delinquency charges due to the COVID-19 financial impact. So that amount comes to $84,000 for the year, or $7,000 for the month of July. We actually haven't seen an impact on delinquency fees yet. We collected $22,088 for the month of July as compared to $22,000 last year in July. The accounts not locked due to COVID are shown here for July. So we would have locked 43 accounts if we were locking accounts. And those 43 accounts would have been 42 single family residential and 1 restaurant. The lock charges year to date. So this is what we talked about last time, and basically going forward, it's just going to show almost like a revenue lost because we are not charging lock fees, and we didn't budget any lock fees for the whole fiscal year 2021, and to date we're not charging lock fees. So for July it's 0, the budget is 0, and last year in July we actually collected $11,650 in lock fees. So in effect, we're estimating that we've lost about $11,650 in this year in July so far. The last slide I'm presenting is the bad debt expense year to date. So bad debt expense for the month of July. And important to note here is that we budgeted 10 times the amount of bad debt that we normally budget for fiscal year 2021. That amounts $450,000 or $37,500 for the month of July. To date, we really haven't seen that. The month of July has $3,194 in bad debt expense as compared to $2,424 last year. So really not a major increase there either. Again, it's only the first month of the fiscal year, but we'll keep monitoring and keep reporting to you on a monthly basis. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions, gentlemen?
No questions, just it was a positive report to see that there hasn't been the kind of the negative aspects of COVID that we might have suspected that we would have gotten. So I think that's positive, not only for the water district and our customers, but the community at large. So it's all in all pretty good news, and I think this is good data to keep tracking. So thank you.
Yeah, and President Evans, this is General Manager Pruitt. I would add, we're cautiously optimistic. Our concern is that as the federal stimulus money dries up, that we may get indicators going in the wrong direction. But for now, everything's comfortably within the budget that we've established.
I would like to say I agree with Mike, and I also think you're right in that we'll probably see some changes moving forward with where the stimulus packages go. But I'm very glad and grateful you put this together. I know the board appreciates it, and it's very interesting to see the numbers that we don't normally know about and how our customers are affected, and us as well, by the climate, as well as the economic situations, as well as the virus. So very interesting. I hope we continue this for some time. It's very fascinating. And I thank you for all the effort, especially you, Mike. I know you just loved it. All right, that we don't have anything to do except to receive the presentation and provide direction. And I think the direction is forward, onward, progress.
Yes.
Thank you, Wes.
Thank you.
Okay, now we will go back to item 2.1, which is the San Diego County Water Authority's Regional Conveyance System Feasibility Study Review. And I don't know if you'd like to start it off for us, General Manager Pruitt, or?
Yeah, I'll take that. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So good evening, President Evans and members of the board. So the item before the board is a discussion about a project being proposed by the County Water Authority to transport Colorado River water to the Water Authority's service area. And the project is called the Regional Conveyance System, and it would provide CWA with an alternative way to receive its Colorado River water supplies. CWA recently began a study to determine the feasibility, the financial cost, and the economic impacts of building such a facility. This isn't the first time the Water Authority has studied this project. This incarnation of the project is fourth or fifth time the concept has been analyzed, and some things have changed, and you may hear a little bit about that. The study has been broken into two initial phases. There's a phase A and a phase B. I believe the Water Authority has budgeted nearly $4 million for the combined studies, and they're nearing the end of phase A. When the project was initially approved, the Water Authority agreed that there would be an off-ramp after phase A, and this would be an opportunity where the Water Authority board could decide whether they wanted to proceed to phase B based on their findings in phase A. The Water Authority will be considering whether to take that off-ramp at their meeting next week on Thursday, August 27th. I haven't seen the item posted yet, but I've been assured that it'll be posted, I believe, by this Friday. So tonight, our board will be receiving multiple presentations. I'll start out by giving a broad overview of the reason for the project. Then there was a team of County Water Authority representatives and a consultant of theirs. They'll provide the board with CWA's findings from phase A of the study. The board will then hear from our consultant, retained by the district to perform an independent review of the County Water Authority report. I will then close with my thoughts before turning the item over to the board for questions and discussions. So feel free to ask questions as the presentations are made, but you may find that your questions will be answered as the presentations progress. Some version of this item is playing out at other member agency boardrooms across the county as we head into next Thursday's County Water Authority board meeting. And I know the team, both the Water Authority team and our consultant team, presented at Valley Center on Monday, and the item took over 2 hours to consider, but I think everyone's getting sharper in their presentation, so I think we'll be a little quicker than that. But time aside, this is an important item. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar project that could serve San Diego County residents and impact its ratepayers for the next 100 years or so. So with that, I'll look to my presentation, and just to kick it off a little bit, just to put it into perspective for the board, the Colorado River, as you all know, is the primary water supply for the Water Authority to meet the Water Authority demands. And they get water from the Colorado River in one of three ways. They can purchase it from Metropolitan. They have access to independent supplies that they received through an agreement they have with the Imperial Irrigation District, and that's about 200,000 acre feet per year. That's what that TAFY means, 1,000 acre feet per year. They also get, the Water Authority also gets Colorado River water credit for a project that the Water Authority did in lining the All-American and Coachella Valley canals, and that's about 78,000 acre feet per year. The canal lining supplies run through the year 2112. You'll hear references later on in the presentation that there was a 92-year analysis that was performed, and that's because we're now in year 2020, and the analysis was taken out through when the canal lining supplies terminate in 2112. The IID supplies go through 2047. There is an option to extend it by 30 years, although terms would have to be renegotiated. Sorry for that. And all Colorado River water supplies, whether they're purchased the IID supplies or the canal lining supplies, they currently all come through the service area through Metropolitan's Colorado River Aqueduct. So as I understand it, this project was initiated because the Water Authority had concerns about metropolitan transportation costs. It costs a lot of money, even in today's dollars, to transport the water, and the concern is that it'll get more expensive as time goes on. There is an agreement that we have with Metropolitan, that the Water Authority has with Metropolitan to transport our supplies, but as I understand it, that goes through about 2047 as well. The Water Authority took an action a year or two ago to extend, to make the exchange agreement and the transfer agreements both terminate in the year 2047. The exchange agreement has a price defined in it that's tied to some price index, so we have some certainty through 2047, but after that, as I understand it, it'll be a negotiation. And the Water Authority did look at historic exchange rate increases, and you'll hear in their presentation and in our consultant's presentation what they found and what the concerns may be. And I think Dan Denham, who's here tonight, said this best at a previous meeting. He said, this is kind of a question about leasing or purchasing. We could continue to lease capacity from Metropolitan and have our water supplies brought to our service area, or we could go buy our own capacity by building a conveyance facility. So with that, I'm going to pause for a second and see if the board has any preliminary questions. And if they don't, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Denham and he can start the Water Authority presentation. So President Evans, does the board have any preliminary questions?
Directors?
Nope.
Doesn't sound like it. So we'll move on to Dan Denham.
All right, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan. Dan is the Deputy General Manager for the San Diego County Water Authority, and he'll be kicking off his team's presentation. So Dan, I don't know if I need to do anything to have you guys share your screen.
Yeah, actually, Glenn, I don't recall what we decided on. Kelly, are you running the presentation for us?
I think Kelly was going to try.
I was going to, but it's not allowing me to share my screen. It says you're up, so perhaps, Glenn, you can share our presentation.
Let me try to do that. Let's see. Let's see. I'm almost there. Does this look right?
That looks perfect. Thank you, Glenn, and thank you for having us here today. We are going to mostly focus on phase A of the study, and you'll understand why I say mostly as we get through this, because phase B is very distinct and unique in nature. Just right up front, Glenn, for not working on the Colorado River stuff for 15 years like myself, I would say you did a pretty good rendition of what the backdrop is. So thank you for that, and I think you saved us a lot of time. But what Glenn presented, what it really speaks to is, I think, the complexity of issues surrounding this study, both from a supply and a transportation perspective. We're talking about decades worth of history and years of investments by San Diego ratepayers that, while it began in 2003 in terms of the initiation of the transfer, you got to understand that the contracts and compacts and law of the river, if you will, that govern, which is now 50% of our region's base water supply, started back in the mid 80s and 90s, leading into the negotiations for the 2003 QSA. So, against that backdrop, I'm happy to continue to answer any questions after this meeting or in leading up to the board vote, like Glenn mentioned, on Thursday on the conveyance study and whether or not we go to phase B. I have Kevin Davis with me from Black & Veatch. He's going to cover the engineering and O&M components to it. Kelly Rogers is our Colorado River Program Director, and Pierce Rosam is our Water Authority's Rates and Debt Manager. So Kelly, let's go, or it's Glenn actually. Let's go to the next slide so I can talk about what we're going to cover here today. Of course, we're going to give you just a quick refresher on the drivers in the study, and like I said, provide an update on phase A results. And of course, we'll talk about phase B. But before we get into that, I want to give you a little, I want to bring up some critical points about the study that I think are worth hearing. It's very conceptual in nature. You know, we're talking about a project that has a 100-year useful life with a 25-year construction period. I say that because nothing is going to happen tomorrow on this project. This is an exploratory study. Like Glenn said, we have off-ramps, phase A, phase B. The alignments themselves, as you will see in some of the slides that we show, you know, they are conceptual in nature and can change. And we have made many presentations out in the community at member agencies and agencies outside of our service area that would be potentially impact and partners on this study. And it's became very obvious to them that, you know, the lines on the map, if you will, they are not set in stone. And so please just keep that in mind as well. There are simply a lot of options that I think we need to look into, and we need to further refine the analysis. And that further refinement of the analysis is based on the direction that staff received from the Water Authority Board when we started this endeavor really in earnest a year ago. And part of that direction was based on input from the member agency managers. A group of general managers submitted a letter some time ago suggesting refinements to scope A or the entire scope, phase A and phase B, and what it would entail. And based on that input, we embarked upon what we have today. And that really is phase A, focusing on the engineering and O&M of the study. You're going to hear me say that a lot because it's very important. What we were tasked with doing was taking a high-level look at the finances of the project. And perhaps finances is the wrong word, I'd say economics. And when I say high level, when you look at a project of this nature, again, a 100-year useful life with a 25-year construction period and years to get across the finish line, you first look at things at a very high level. Look high, and then you refine with subsequent scope adjustments and subsequent phases. Again, that was the direction that we were provided, and I think that any step beyond that, such as attempting to estimate rate impacts out into 2040 or 2050, or making assumptions as to what new agreements could or should be in place. For instance, should you negotiate a new exchange agreement with the Metropolitan Water District? That's really beyond our scope. I think that those are all good and valid questions, but it's mostly conjecture at this point. And it's phase B. It's not phase A. So I believe you may hear some of that in the presentation that follows. So I just wanted to let you know that as questions arise in that regard, staff was not directed to go there, so we can't go there, and we didn't. And so in some cases, when you hear things that go into phase B, and if I'm asked to comment, I simply can't go there at this point because I was not directed to by our board. Certainly have opinions. As Don and Doug and I have discussed, we have a difference of opinions in some regard, and I think that's fine. I think that what we're talking about here is something that is so far out into the future that as you tweak numbers up and down here and there, as you all can imagine, the magic of an Excel spreadsheet, you know, things change. And I think that kind of speaks to what the Water Authority's attempt here was to do is develop financial assumptions that were extremely conservative. We wanted to provide a baseline picture, get an idea of what some bookends may look like. No partnership funding is a very important piece of our analysis. It is the core piece of phase B, and so all of the numbers that you see will not include any of the ideas that we've discussed with our board and with our work group. The Colorado River Work Group, who's overseeing this project, is comprised of a number of board members. The ideas that we are tasked to look into in phase B, if approved, to sort of knock down the cost of the project. So I wanted to say that up front, and I also want to remind everyone that this project is not looking for any new water. I think that that's a basic question that's asked. the pipe, if you will be sized for the 280,000 acre feet of canal lining water. Nothing more, nothing less, if you will. And again, in terms of the QSA contracts, the multi-generational nature of those 33 agreements, we haven't even touched upon at this point. What I think this speaks to is there are lots of moving pieces, lots of dynamic parts, and a lot of those dynamic parts by design are not to be, or were not to be studied at this point in the study. It's very high level, and I just hope that you can keep that in mind as we go through the presentation. So next slide, please. So I think one of the more important takeaways that I hope I impress upon you today is that this is not simply a conveyance study. It's not a pipe that goes from point A to point B. It's not a single-use pipe study, and it's very different, in fact, than anything that the Water Authority has studied before. There was some reference to maybe this being the fourth or fifth rendition of this, and well, to a certain extent, that's true in terms of the the alignments, if you will, and the desktop engineering. This study takes on a whole different approach to anything that we've studied in the past, and it's the movement from a single use to multi-use. And in terms of how that multi-use facility came about, it was the brainchild or the group work of staff, consultants, and board members that began in early 2019 when we started looking at conveyance alignments and said, hey, this alignment here is going through this area. How can that constituency benefit from what we're talking about? And so obviously when you start in the Imperial Valley at the far eastern end of the All-American Canal, you have a lot of options. You can continue to go north at gravity flow to the Salton Sea and up through Borrego. You can continue to hug the U.S.-Mexican border, or you can shoot straight through East County. A lot of options, a lot of partners, and we think a lot of opportunity. We've identified some of those opportunities up front in our baseline assumptions. Those baseline assumptions would be the preliminary engineering and design concepts that we've developed with the Imperial Irrigation District. There are other concepts that are less developed, but we have experience through being a member of the Quantification Settlement Joint Powers Authority that involve environmental work at the Salton Sea and collaboration with the state and federal government. I think as you get into North County and one of the alignments there, and even in South County alignments, that's where we'd look to engage our member agencies for items such as storage. Next slide, please. So why study this now? I've heard this several times and in several different ways, whether it's the fact that 2047 is so far away. Why wouldn't we just simply renegotiate an exchange agreement with MWD instead of studying this? Is the $3.9 million for the study well spent? What are the rate implications out in 2045? For instance, what are the rate impacts now? Do we need to renegotiate the QSA first? Don't we have to talk to the state and federal government first? And those are just a few, and I think that those are all valid, legitimate, and valuable questions. But in many cases, they do get a little bit ahead of the task at hand. And I'm seeing that a lot as I talk to people about this study, because those are the questions. Those are the questions that need to be answered. But they're not necessarily the questions that need to be answered for the Water Authority Board to move from checking a box that says this is technically feasible from an engineering perspective and moving into phase B to look at getting in the weeds on some of the finances and partnership opportunities. I want to speak a little bit to that first bullet that you see on your slide there, which is that I think, as Glenn alluded to, some very important decisions are going to need to be made in the mid-2020s. And I think if you look at this study against, or you look at that against the backdrop of this study and a potential construction timeline, you'll kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about. we have no option for transportation of the 200,000 acre feet worth of supplies in 2047. Conceptually, we think that we can have a pipeline built by 2045. So that's at least preliminary for what Black and Veatch has determined. If you consider that construction takes 10 to 15 years, you're in mid-2035. In the mid-2030s, you're going to be doing things such as preliminary design, environmental, legal, land use type issues. That's another 10 years. I don't think that that's disputable. This gets to the 25-year nature of the project. So here we are in the mid-2020s where we have to consider this as an option, one of many options going forward for the region. And so that's a point I want to impress upon you as well, because I think it's very easy to sit back and say, perhaps we delay this by 5 years, 10 years. Let's see what happens with METS rates and charges, right? Will they really go up as they have for the past several decades? Let's just wait this out and see. Why are we rushing to build a project? And so what I would tell you is that no one's rushing to build a project, but what we are doing is trying to make incremental, informed decisions about the future of what is 50% of our regional water supply. Now, I can't adequately describe the numerous contracts, compacts, and laws that make up the law of the Colorado River in 10 minutes, or let alone on one slide. But I want to say, in the context of this study, an understanding, a firm understanding of what governs 50% of our water supply is very important. There are milestones and triggers and agreements amongst parties, very simply put, such as a take or pay contract, and many other examples about escape clauses, notices, things of that nature, that it's impossible in many ways to try to think that you could delay some of these things without losing significant opportunity and potential loss of, like I said, 50% of your base supply. So we continue to look towards options in the future, and like I said, this study aims to fully inform just one of many options in the future. And I think that because it carries a heavy burden of being difficult to conceptualize and with many variables out into the future, no one has a crystal ball, and no one's going to have the right answer to this out in 2045. I think that what that speaks to is incremental planning and sound planning with off-ramps. And that's what the Water Authority is planning to do if we move through Phase B, to incrementally make sound decisions about our water supply future. So next slide, please. So while we have these supplies long-term, transportation for these supplies, like I said, terminate in 2047, and that's for the bulk of the QSA water. This is the 200,000 acre feet. 80,000 acre feet worth of the canal lining water we have secured through an exchange agreement with Metropolitan through 2112, the life of the 110-year agreement. So what we have before us is, in my view, a very simple question. You first determine, can the project be built from an engineering and design perspective? And at a high level, does it cross over, if you will, at some point with what you pay Metropolitan? That's Phase A in a nutshell. It's nothing more, nothing less. It's a high-level look at what you should be looking at when you're talking about a facility of this nature. So the next question becomes, and this would be Phase B, well, what does the future look like? What's a plausible future? What's implausible, if you will, right? And so I'll tell you that Phase A has not determined what that future looks like, but there are predictors of what that future can look like, and I think that this chart simply illustrates it. Over the past 20 years, since the inception of the QSA, transportation has been the subject to increasing costs that have outpaced inflation, plain and simple. Our supply costs have tracked well below that mark. Now, I'll tell you that whether you're looking at a 10, 20, 30, or 80-year time horizon, this truth holds the test of time. Metropolitan's transportation rates outpace inflation, and if you don't think it's real, I will tell you that over the past 4 years, the Water Authority has assumed modest transportation rates in its rate projections, right? You typically will assume a 4, a 5% increase of transportation. Over the past 4 years, metropolitan transportation has increased by 30% to the Water Authority. That's to your wholesaler, and those costs are passed down to you. Just last year, the Water Authority received a 10% increase in transportation from metropolitan. Now, the Water Authority's financial projections moving forward, and of course, what we're looking at long term on this is a 5% increase in net rates long term. I think that that is reasonable based on not only the most recent history that I just described, but Met's long-term history. Go back 20, 30 years, and it remains the same. It outpaces inflation. So next slide, please. So let me remind you of what the study covers. Now, recall we started this, like I said, back in 2017. Glenn alluded to this, and this was the extension of the exchange agreement. We matched up the terms of the transfer and the exchange out to 2047. And our board, based on the discussion at that time, decided to take a look at this transportation option. And so that's what we've been doing. More detailed once we brought Black and Beach on, but nonetheless, it's evolved. It's evolved from 2017 into what you see today with this multi-use off-ramp approach that includes an independent analysis from the Water Authority. Of course, there's the independent analysis from the member agencies' consultants. But nonetheless, Phase A was to look at fatal flaws, and Phase B heads into a different realm if we get there, which is partnerships and financing. I'm going to give this to Kevin Davis now. We can go to the next slide, Glenn. And Kevin from Black and Beach is going to talk about really the results of Phase A that I think many of both the Water Authority's independent consultant as well as the member agency manager consultant do not refute in terms of the validity of the costs and technical feasibility.
Thank you, Dan, and good evening. I'm going to just walk through some high-level outcomes of the study, and I want to start with just orientating everybody with the various alignments and where they start and where they end. And so the graphic that you see here has 3 alternatives on it. You'll see that the northernmost alternative is alternative 3A, it's in blue. 2 southern alternatives, alternatives 5A and 5C. And it's important that you know those alternatives because we'll talk about those in a minute when we talk about some of the outcomes. And also I wanted to point out that the conveyance system that would move the QSA water is starting at the All-American Canal, and it's at its western terminus, and it's moving all the way into the Water Authority's aqueduct system. And that's shown on the graphic here. If we could go to the next slide, please. So let me start with the objectives, and the objectives in Phase A are really to evaluate, conceptual routes. And this is a feasibility study, and so nothing's actually designed. We don't have design drawings. And there's a great deal of flexibility that is inherent in this conceptual level. So alignments can change slightly, et cetera, to make things work. Something else, and I know there's been several mention of previous studies. So the regional conveyance systems have been studied since the 1990s. And a couple of the alignments, alternatives 5A and 5C, have been studied several times since then. However, alternative 3A has not been studied since 1996. And as a result, it was important for us to bring the level of detail in the study for alternative 3A up to the same level as alternatives 5A and 5C so that we could compare apples to apples. Another objective was to determine the technical and financial fatal flaws, and if there were any. The technical fatal flaws are pretty obvious, but what we mean by the financial fatal flaws is, you may have heard this expression before, that you can engineer anything, but some things are very, very expensive, and it wouldn't make sense to do that. So if something was possible but ultra expensive, that would become a financial fatal flaw. So that's our vernacular for that. We also had an objective of taking those 3 alternatives and seeing if we could screen those down to 2 or fewer alternatives. And then finally, we wanted to assess the potential partnerships that could be brought into this regional system. And those partnerships were assessed at a very high level. We did not go and talk to all of the potential partners and negotiate deals, none of that. We just simply identified them, and Phase B would then, of course, carry those forward. If we can go to the next slide, please. So I'm going to just go through the key takeaways from Phase A. And the QSA water is something that is determined from our study to be needed in the future. And so how did we determine that? So you've heard, and I think Dan's mentioned and others have mentioned, that there are concerns about is there a need for this water in the future? And so we looked at the 2015 Urban Water Management Plan and the 2018 reset of that Urban Water Management Plan. And in that Urban Water Management Plan reset, it evaluated all of the local supply development projects that were penciled in and ready to go. And those were considered as part of the demand forecast. And so we reviewed that and determined that not only would you need the QSA supply based on those numbers, but you would also need additional supplies from MET to meet the future demands in 2045 and beyond. All 3 of the regional conveyance system alternatives are technically feasible and viable. However, only alternatives 3A and 5A were economically competitive. And the reason for that is 5C has a very high energy use, primarily because we're pumping up and over the mountain range instead of going through it. Alternatives 3A and 5A have long tunnels, and that saves us a lot of energy. So once you have the tunnels built, you don't have to pump to the same elevation. That energy cost is something that's also increased significantly, and since some of the last studies were done. And so the cost of that energy and the future projections of that energy really made alternative 5C not economically competitive. We had never looked at in the previous studies how the alternatives, any of the regional conveyance system, would be incorporated into the Water Authority's aqueduct system. As part of this study, we did. And we determined that both alternatives 3A and 5A could be integrated into the Water Authority's aqueduct system without a lot of major investments. There will be some facilities that need to be built, but it was very favorable for the regional conveyance system. And finally, Dan mentioned this, and I just want to reinforce this. When you consider the length of period between the planning and design followed by construction, or the pre-construction and construction periods, you're looking at really 25 years to implement a program of this scale. And so if you do delay it, then you won't be able to meet the deadlines that this would provide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pierce, and he'll walk through the economic analysis.
All right, good afternoon. So Pierce Rossum, I'm the rate and debt manager here at the Water Authority. Just wanted to start kind of with the purpose of our analysis from an economic standpoint. Really, we needed some mechanism to help with the initial screening process. As Kevin just walked through, we wanted to see if we could identify, go from 3 alternatives down to 2 and analyze it from that perspective. We also wanted to look at this from not only a conveyance perspective and viewing it in a vacuum, but also understanding that with this decision comes those decisions to extend the supply agreements to match at a minimum the canal lining agreement in 2112. So as we kind of kept progressing, comparing these analyses, the total cost in terms of conveyance and supply, how did that compare against the status quo or going back on the metropolitan system? So really looking at historically what has Metropolitan done in terms of rate increases. The initial feedback that we got was also, what if we just develop locally? And so the Water Authority did a quick, very high level analysis of just looking at what additional local supplies might look at. And this is above and beyond those projects that are already identified, as Kevin mentioned, in the urban water management plan. So this would be that next layer of even more expensive local supply. From direction, or with direction from the board, this analysis was directed to be conservative, focus on the water authority funding it only, conservative cost assumptions, really setting the ceiling, start high and refine. And so we'll go into a little bit more in this in the next slide, please. So the economic approach is, how do you compare all these different alternatives, these different alignments with something that's already built? And the way to look at that is a cash flow analysis, or a net present value. And you do annual cash flows, and we built a model to support this analysis going all the way out to 2112 to match that canal line term. And we discounted all those numbers back to today's dollars, and you then have a total net present value of that entire time analysis. As has been mentioned, we set the net present value analysis to match the ending of the canal lining agreement. One of the things we did, pardon me as I move rooms here, one of the things we looked at was also understanding that it has to match the useful life of the asset. This isn't a standard project by any means, and it shouldn't be measured on any standard basis. This is a unique project with a 100-year useful life. This is something that is not normally developed. And so wanting to make sure when we look at this, we understand that we're trying to match the supply that's being conveyed through 2112, as well as 60 years or so of this asset. And as again directed by the board, phase A, or phase A and phase B were purposely split into two projects, or two phases. One was the technical, can it be done? Are there any fatal flaws? And then phase B would be refine that really high level economic analysis. And if it was in the ballpark, continuing to refine. We understand that a high level initial look isn't going to be the only answer. There are a lot of assumptions that need to be made and controlled for, but this is something that was always planned for phase B. Next slide, please. When taking a look at the numbers out of the Black and Veatch report, we have the capital costs as well as the annual OM&R, so annual maintenance, operations, and replacement costs for each of the three alternatives. As you see on the screen, there's about $5 billion worth of capital for each of the alignments. When we take a look at the annual O&M, this is where you see differences. 3A and 5A are effectively the same project cost, but 5C, because of the additional pumping requirements, really sets it apart in terms of cost, and we've elected to screen that alternative. Bringing your attention to the bottom of the screen, this is the net present value analysis, and this is really all the costs from today through 2112 that are incremental for RCS, and all the planning costs up to 2045, and then the alternatives in terms of, do we build regional conveyance and maintain our own supply? Do we build locally, or do we go back on the MWD for that full 200,000 acre feet? And as you can see, the preliminary numbers show $32 billion in net present value, and that's combined transportation, which is the bulk of it, conveying our cheap QSA supplies. When we take a look at the alternative of, what if you didn't extend the IID agreement? What if you built that 200,000 acre feet up, had it come online in 2047 at the end of the agreement, and what would that look like? Obviously, the transportation cost goes way down because you're only conveying the 80,000 acre feet of the canal lining water, but the supply cost itself balloons to reflect the greater cost of that next increment of local supply. This isn't the projects that we're doing right now in terms of local supply. It's above and beyond those projects. The final bars is the MWD reliance. And that shows, $50 billion in net present value. And, that's a pretty stark difference between the 32 billion for the baseline for RCS. And that's primarily driven by the fact that MWD continues to have much higher than inflation rate increases. And it doesn't really matter if you take our basis, our factual basis of the last 20 years of MWD rates, or a much longer period of time, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, you name it. Met's been historically above inflation. And understanding that from a high level analysis, we needed to pick a number. And this is a number that we felt was reasonable, backed by data, and just really reflective of the future costs that MWD has alluded to. One of the things that's not included in this number, again, we wanted to be conservative, is there are billions of dollars of capital projects that MWD has defined that would be above and beyond their kind of normal doing business. This is the recycled water program, the Delta Fix, or whatever the name of the day is, and the subsidence issues they're having on the California River or Aqueduct. And those are the things is, even if you wanted to say 5.1 is not necessarily the number, not going to disagree with you, but want to make sure that that number's grounded and really understands some of those future costs as well. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things when looking at the numbers, and we've shown this to the board previously, is you don't want to just look at this from a net present value perspective at the end of the day. You want to look at it from an annual basis. And these are really setting up the questions for Phase B. What are the ratepayer impacts? How much do we pay now? How much do we pay later? When do we see a benefit? And again, this is a snapshot of many alternatives that are out there, but we feel that this is a conservative snapshot. And really, when we take a look at this, there's $3.6 billion of upfront costs before you start seeing a return for this project. And when you break that up, it's important to focus on, this is high level, assumes no outside funding, no partnerships, and really conservative assumptions. When we take a look at the cost between now and 2035, as has been discussed, this is a long planning process. We're only going to be spending, forecasted right now, 125 million over the next 15 years. And that's inclusive of this study that we're currently in. So there's a long runway in which to further analyze, further digest, further refine, and optimize the world of options that's out there. The majority of the difference would be when we start constructing. And this is going to be a big focus if Phase B is to identify ways to minimize that dip, that upfront cost. Understanding that there's big opportunities potentially out there. Again, this is a snapshot, but this is assuming 5.1% increases. That is the norm for metropolitan. We would love for them to adjust it downwards. And sometimes we're optimistically so in our rate modeling. But here, this was a real opportunity to look back at, we don't know what the number is. And we're surprised to see, honestly, that it is, so much more above inflation. All of this to say, really refining in phase B. We don't have the answers. We don't have a crystal ball, but we're using the data that we have available. So with that, I'm going to send it back to Dan just to wrap up the slides.
I can't hear Dan.
Dan, you're muted.
Thank you. After 6 months, I still haven't learned, right? So I guess I just want to wrap it up real quick is what I was saying. You know, this is a $1.3 million item that the board will vote on Thursday of next week. It's $1.3 million it's budgeted for in our $180 million 2-year CIP budget. About half of that 1.3 goes to Black and Veatch. About half of it is project management. But again, what they're really voting on is not what's been confirmed by the technical analysis here. It's what you would start to look at going forward with some of the QSA contracts, the plan of finance, and a number of partnership opportunities that are across the board instructive to how to bring down the cost of the project. So I will leave it at that, and you know, be happy to answer any questions that all of you have.
All right, thank you very much, all three of you, on that. It was great. Directors, who would like to start out with their questions or comments? I'm sure you have many. Oh, none, I guess.
I have a question. I just was
All right,
polite.
Director Hernandez.
Did I understand or read that even with the conveyance, we're not increasing our water supply, we're just maintaining it and having our own control of it? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, we're not looking to increase the IID supply. I guess the way that I would frame it as we're looking to further protect the cheaper base supply for the region that is 50% of our supply portfolio.
And then my second question is, in some of the past conferences, I think I've heard that they're talking about a reallocation of the Colorado River. If that were to take place, would that reliability of supply diminish proportionately?
No, it wouldn't, and I would tell you that in a very matter-of-fact way. You know, there's a lot of speculation out there about the river running dry, and admittedly, the river is overprescribed. But I think what's important to know, and this was an important piece of what our region embarked upon in 2003 with the QSA, is that our supplies are tied to senior priority rights on the river. Senior priority rights mean that junior water holders will face curtailments in the light of a secretarial declared reduction before us. And the junior rights holder in this case is Metropolitan. Now, understand that backing up for a minute here, that Arizona and Nevada, because of their junior status, they would be taking cuts in a situation where the river is facing cutbacks first. California would contribute next, and because the Metropolitan Water District agreed to backstop all cuts for California in the recently approved drought contingency plan, Metropolitan would face cuts before IID loses a drop of water. So I think that's very important in terms of, you know, the law of the river. I alluded to this earlier, that there are compacts and decrees that govern things. But make no mistake, water rights are important, and the Water Authority's water is tied to some of the most senior rights on the river.
Thank you.
Director Sinella, do you have any comments or questions?
Not yet. I'll wait till the end.
All right, thank you. Director Martin? And Director Ellithorpe?
Yeah,
I do,
I had just
Director
one question,
President.
Dan. On your slide 4, one of the statements is a delay in the study would forego significant options for the region. And could you explain maybe in more detail what those options might be?
Yeah, in simple, what I mean is a statement that I've made up front and that I truly believe in, and it is that you don't do this kind of project, you don't embark upon this kind of endeavor without extending the water transfer agreement with the Imperial Irrigation District. I don't think that it makes sense to build a project of this nature without extending the transfer out for another generation or two, right? So, you know, at a very high level, I'm talking about extend it at least to the term of the canal lining, 2112, if not further. And so that's the option that we would forego with the delay. And I say that because I think what's important to do is we're viewing this through the world of course, the Water Authority, you know, Vallecitos and our region. I think if you view the world and this project through the lens of both Metropolitan and the Imperial Irrigation District, it's quite different. Any sort of delay with deciding on what to do with the water means that IID, through the priority system on the Colorado River, would not have an off-taker for its water. And so it would have to start negotiating with another party sooner than later to make sure that its water does not fall through the priority system for free to the Metropolitan Water District. So I think if you view the world through that lens, once the other party sees that you are delaying to wait to see what happens, what would you do? And what I would do is start to look for other off-takers. And so the foregone opportunity is to extend what is our cheapest base supply for the region. So I think if you look through the other lens, what does that mean for the Metropolitan Water District and the opportunities for an extension of the exchange agreement? You have to think like they would, which is, well, what's the incentive to continue the exchange agreement? If I don't, I get this water for free. And so this is the complex dynamic nature of the river. And what I'm talking about in terms of the compacts and decrees that and milestones, candidly, and the QSA agreements that make it all one big dynamic project.
Okay, thank you.
Director Martin, are you there? And did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah, my question is, and I understand all the dynamics of the water and all the rights. However, if you look back at the river 50 years ago and now look at it 50 years ahead, you can see it'll be almost dry. No doubt about it. You're not making new water anywhere, and our use keeps going up. So my thought is we in Southern California are the most likely to have a new water source called the Pacific Ocean, which the other states don't have that option. I think sooner or later the federal government could step in and help solve this problem for all of the states involved by us getting our water from the Pacific Ocean, and therefore the water we would generally use would go to the other states and would help them out. It seems to be more of a global solution than San Diego.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I have thought that myself at times, how it could be much more simple. You know, in fact, if the Water Authority, you know, did maintain its QSA supplies, how there are options, and you know, perhaps this is to be studied if we ever get there in a future phase, where that Carlsbad desal water that we have, that is a commodity on the river. You know, being able to partner with an agency like the state of Nevada or Arizona, or even Mexico for that reason, who have the ability to trade and swap water through Lake Mead through the exact same exchange mechanism that we have with the transfer. And what I mean by that is you leave some of your QSA water in the river, right? You don't take it. You pay IID for it, but you don't take it. Another off-taker takes it and pays you for your Carlsbad desal water. And I know that's sort of a complex arrangement, but it's no different than what's happening today and what people are talking about and doing. Right now, the Central Arizona project is looking at Sonoran desal in Mexico at a price point that's much higher than the Carlsbad desal project. It stands to reason that if you have an asset and you have equity in what you've built in the QSA, and it's at a relatively affordable rate compared to other sources in the broad spectrum of things, that's a commodity that can be traded, that you can use. And my point is that do you completely forego that asset in place of a more expensive one? And I think that in Pierce's analysis that he showed, this is the local supply option, what you would be doing, and just sort of visualize this water math here. But the QSA supplies, the weighted average cost is $500 an acre foot, right? You have 600 some dollars that you pay to IID. You get the canal lining water for 30. Your weighted average, your melded rate, if you will, is about 500 bucks. You pay transportation to Met for 500 bucks, so your QSA water is a little over 1,000. If this region wants to fundamentally shift where it gets its water from, and assuming there's enough reuse available and enough desire to build, let's say, 150 MGD desal plant to replace the 200,000 acre feet of supplies, what you would fundamentally be doing is shifting the cost base of your regional supply from $1,000 an acre foot to something in the neighborhood of $3,000, $4,000 an acre foot, depending on what you do and your resource mix. And so I think that's important, and it's why I keep saying that this is transportation plus supply. You're protecting that $1,000 base supply and securing it long term.
Any other questions? Okay, Dan, I have one. I think maybe I just lost something in the translation here, but you have in this particular page that a delay in the study would forego significant options, and you just mentioned that has to do with the QSA. Well, just listening to you, it sounds to me like it's critical, whether we build another conveyance system or not, that the Water Authority begins working on extending that agreement. It doesn't really matter if, so when we talk about, if we have questions still regarding this phase A that aren't fully answered, it seems odd to me to push it forward on this coming Thursday if that's one of the main reasons. We can move forward on a QSA agreement, whether we do this or the conveyance or not, or if I missed something in that.
Yeah, Director Evans, I think the way I would characterize it is you have to keep all of your options open. Once you have all of the tools on the table, right? And I described what some of those tools would be conceptually with, on the river with other states and whatnot, and your base supply, what reuse costs. And once you start moving around all of those tools and implementing all of those tools, I think you're going to come up with a better solution for the region. Once you remove an option such as independent transportation in this regard, I think you're limiting yourself in what you can do. And so what I'm suggesting is that you pursue all options simultaneously. It could be that you fundamentally change the supply base of the region, as was suggested. Go to the ocean, right? I mean, if that's the desire of the Water Authority ratepayers and board members at our member agencies and the Water Authority, then we will get there. But to have options, I think it makes the decision path and the decision matrix a little bit more palatable.
Okay, then let me just ask you this. If we chose to delay this just a few months, so everyone felt that they really fully understood and had listened to this many times through and asked all the questions that come up afterwards, I don't think that would be removing any options, whether it was we decided this on August or we decided it in October or December. I don't think we're going to just sit still. So personally, as a board member, and I'm looking at all this stuff, I feel like there's a lot of information that's come up at the last minute and isn't really being given the time and the due diligence that needs to study it to really make an informed decision. We're not even quite sure what the options are, and at this point, we're not really sure. As you said, it's all been guesswork on the numbers that we're throwing out. So right off the bat, after listening to this, my only thought is, then if this is so important and it's for generations and for hundreds of years decision making, a few months time and 1 month now seems to be a rather quick response on a very serious and very important and what could prove to be a very beneficial decision. So this is my comment. All right, anything else? Okay, what comes next then? I would like to thank you, Pierce and Kelly and Kevin and Dan, very much for your presentation and for all the answers to the questions and putting out your views for us. Thank you. Very much.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for
waiting. We'll stay online.
Okay. Okay, Glenn, now what?
Glenn, if it's okay, I can share my screen.
Glenn, you're on mute.
All right, can you hear me now? Okay, so Doug, you said you can share?
Yes.
Okay, so just a little intro. So based on the magnitude and scope of this project, and obviously it's very big, it's received a lot of attention from the CWA member agencies, general managers, myself included, and 18 of the 24 Water Authority general managers agreed to join together to retain the services of a consultant to perform an independent analysis of the CWA study. The member agencies retained Don McFarland and Doug Gillingham, both who are with us tonight, and they both have decades of experience analyzing the technical and financial details associated with large municipal water projects. The consultants have prepared a report summarizing their findings, and they're here tonight to share those findings with the board. So unless the board has any preliminary questions for me, I'll turn it over to Doug. Or Don, I'm not sure who's taking it over.
Yes, this is Don McFarland of DLM Engineering, and good evening, President Evans, members of the board, and members of the staff. Next slide, please. This is what Doug and myself will cover tonight. The introduction and background has gotten really short because Glenn and Dan did a really good job on that already. And the technical review is also pretty short, and then we'll get right into the economic review. Next slide. We can skip this one. They've covered that already. We can skip this one, just more stats about the project. I think we've gone through all the dates that are important, and Doug will reference many of those in his presentation. Next slide. Okay, the scope of our work was to review the technical documents, economic analysis, and the economic model. We coordinated with Water Authority staff on a weekly basis, shared our findings, discussed various items, got input from them. It was an open review process, and they basically had our key findings before they were ever published in our report. And our final step is to provide recommendations for use by the individual member agencies, which we'll do tonight. Next slide, please. Okay, engineering cost review. We found the engineering reports that came out in June to be reasonable assessments of capital costs and annual costs. There's a couple of comments we have here on them we've provided to the Water Authority, but overall, they're relatively minor costs. Most of the discussion we'll have is with respect to the economic analysis. Next slide. And these are the costs that we're working with. You can see in the second column in March what they were looking like, and then the Water Authority hired a company to do an independent cost analysis of the project, and then using that information revised their estimates to $5 billion of capital and $143 million of annual operation, maintenance, repair, and replacement. And we're using those numbers going forward in the economic analysis. Next slide. And with that, I'll turn it over to Doug.
Okay, thank you, Don. Good afternoon or evening, whatever it is. President Evans and members of the board, thank you for inviting us in to review the results of our report. The starting point for my presentation on economic analysis is the Water Authority slide, which summarizes the net present value comparison of the regional conveyance system to the other alternatives. And the takeaway here, of course, is that using all of the assumptions made by the Water Authority to generate these numbers, the RCS has a net economic advantage of 17, 18, 19 billion dollars, a staggering amount of money, even though it's spread out over 92 years. And you can see the seductiveness of this kind of analysis and presentation, because what's not to like about the project? Not only do we get an independent aqueduct system, but we have the opportunity to save enormous amounts of money for future generations. Unfortunately, we're here this afternoon to tell you that our review is that the assumptions that underpin this analysis really do not stand up to reasonable scrutiny, to reasonable standard methods of economic analysis. And we're going to walk you through that. The analysis by the Water Authority is underpinned by three key assumptions. One is that it's appropriate to look at a net present value analysis, not just over 30 or 40 years, but over 92 years. The second is that, as you've heard, MWD rates are going to escalate significantly faster than all other costs involved in these calculations, and do so for the full 92-year period of analysis. And lastly, that Water Authority demands will be sufficient to utilize the full QSA supply through 2112, and by extension to utilize the full capacity of the regional conveyance system. We're going to look at those. I've got 5 quick headlines from our report that I'm going to walk you through. The first is that the RCS is not cost competitive over standard periods of economic analysis. Any planning engineer or finance or economist person would start off with a quick back of the envelope sketch and produce what we call a typical first year unit cost analysis. And for the RCS, using all of the Water Authority's numbers, this would tell us that the regional conveyance system would have a unit cost of about $1,500 an acre foot. And the point of comparison is the MWD exchange price, which for 2020 has a unit cost of $482 an acre foot. And so right off the start here, the regional conveyance system is more than 3 times more costly than the MWD exchange. However, this is just the first year cost sketch. And this is not accounting for differential rates of inflation. And so the next, if we think it's warranted, the next level of analysis that we get into on these projects is a standard financial review, or a net present value analysis, as Pierce described it. And typically we would look at a period of time that matched up with the agency's bonding authority, on the expectation that those paying for the bond should be the beneficiaries, and that likewise those paying for the bonds deserve some appropriate rate of return on their investment, because you're the fiduciaries, you're spending the public's money, they should have some return on it. So we would, for the Water Authority, they can bond at 40 years. We would look at a 40-year period and build in the differential inflation escalation rates that are part of the Water Authority assumptions. And that would show that the regional conveyance system now costs only about 50% more than the MWD exchange option. In the first year analysis, it was 3 times, now it's only 50%. And that's because we've gone from that first year sketch to a 40-year period of review. And it's still not cost competitive with MWD exchange, but you can start to see how this magic of compounding interest rates, of compounding escalation, MWD rates escalating at 5.1% per year, and what would happen if we extended that period of analysis even further. And so that's the idea that the Water Authority came up with. And they looked at it this way. They said, the project itself is not standard and really doesn't fit into these standard methods of analysis. And that's in part because it has this up to 25-year lead time of project planning and 10 years or more to bore these very long tunnels through the Laguna Mountains. So here's the timeline. It's 2020 now. 2040 would be the midpoint of several tranches of bond funding, $6 billion of bonds being issued to fund construction. 2045, the project is operational. 2080 would be a 40-year period of analysis after the midpoint of project funding. But the Water Authority has extended that an additional 32 years, 72 years after the midpoint, 92 years from now, meaning that the analysis includes 92 years of compounding escalation of MET rates. So that's a long time in the future. Our take on this is that looking at a net present value over this long a period of time is not right, it's not wrong, but it clearly is unusual. And it's unusual to the degree that it seems to us that a board of directors deserves to be informed of how unusual it is. And they deserve to be informed of the reasons why staff thinks that the 92-year period of analysis is appropriate. And as part of that, they deserve to be informed that it's not cost effective when looked at under standard periods. So we concede this to the Water Authority. We think, okay, you can look at it for 92 years, but you have a professional obligation to your board to explain that. And none of this was explained in the previous work. And so there's time now over the next week or the next months to provide that explanation. Point 2, an extended period of analysis entails generational transfers of costs and benefits. This chart is generated by the Water Authority's very detailed economic model that they shared with us. The model didn't include this particular graphical capability, and so we thought this was an important element, and so we added this to the model so that we could show these graphics to report the data that they had already built into the model. And Pierce, this is similar to the slide that Pierce showed you. This is a comparison of net costs in red, net benefits in black, when we compare the regional conveyance system versus the MWD reliance option that the Water Authority has identified. And so you see that $3.6 billion of upfront costs running through 2062, and then you start to move into the black and you start to pay it off. This graph includes all of the default assumptions from the Water Authority, except that we've capped the analysis at 40 years after the midpoint of project funding. So this caps at 2080. If we extend it the additional 32 years, you can see the effect. We keep adding ever growing black bars to the right side of the chart. And now we're back to that $19 billion advantage. A couple notes here though. The red bars will occur with a high degree of certainty because they arise from the financing of $6 billion of capital. So once you start that, the red bars are definite. The black bars, on the other hand, arise almost entirely from this assumption that Met rates are increasing so fast, and specifically increasing so much faster than everything else. And that to us seems quite speculative. So high certainty associated with the red bars, fairly high degree of uncertainty associated with the benefits to the right. It's the decision of, is this a wise investment, is certainly an interesting policy matter for a board of directors. There's no clear economic guidance to say that this is a good deal or a bad deal. It certainly would benefit future generations, but on a generational basis, generation 1 and part of generation 2 is incurring a pretty heavy cost. So it's an interesting policy decision for a board to make. Point 3, the Water Authority's assumptions of MWD price escalation are highly implausible. And I start off with this story with this newspaper headline. This is from the New York Times from 2008. And it's quoting a study from Scripps Oceanography saying, gee, if these present trends continue, Lake Mead's going to go dry. Well, we know, of course, that Lake Mead isn't dry. And we know that when faced with dire predictions or unsustainable forecasts, that systems and institutions and governments adapt and adjust to keep that forecast from coming true. And that's what's happened on the Colorado River. The agencies and authorities have instituted all sorts of new programs, and there's water in Lake Mead today. It's an example of the natural human cognitive bias for over extrapolation of past trends to predict the future. Here's what happens with Met rates inflating at 5.1% per year and being brought back to present worth 2020 dollars at 3%. Those are both default numbers from the detailed Water Authority economic model. Met rates go from $840 an acre foot now, $1,400 an acre foot, $3,100, $5,400 an acre foot. And as a point of comparison, we showed a sample Met member agency or Water Authority member agency pure water project, which perhaps might start out at a unit cost of $2,300. There's a power component of that escalates a little faster than the discount rate. And so that number creeps up. But what this tells us is that Met rates cannot escalate that fast because it's unsustainable. It's unsustainable in the market of Met supply and demand for water. If Met water costs $5,000 an acre foot, all of the Met member agencies are going to figure out some other way to get their water, and it's going to cost less than $5,000 an acre foot. It's interesting to hear the Water Authority's presentation on this, and I realized this afternoon that we haven't quite reached an understanding of what this issue is. We've noted in some of our previous presentations that we think it's likely that over the long term, the costs at Metropolitan that are driving these increases in rates, that those costs will eventually come back down to more background levels. And as you heard today, they're saying, well, now we've got Delta Fix, we've got a big pure water project that wants to do, we've got Colorado River repairs, we've got other things, and maybe these costs will continue forever. And so just for discussion, we'll concede that point. Suppose the Met costs that are driving that projected rate increase actually did continue in that manner and do so for 92 years. Our point is still that the Met rates cannot go up that fast. That may sound like I'm saying two contradictory things, but Met has alternatives for how they design their rate structure. And if Met were faced with this prediction here, then Met would have no choice but to shift some of its costs out of the volumetric commodity rates and figure out ways to put them as unavoidable fixed fees on all of its customers. And that's a certainty. So we aren't saying it's just a difference of opinion of could MET rates increase this fast. We're saying that MET rates cannot and will not increase that fast for the simple reason that they can't. It's against the laws of economic supply and demand. If we make one change to the previous red-black chart, and if we cap the MET escalation rate after 20 years, we'll escalate at 5.1% for 20 years, and then we're going to reduce it to sort of the background level of the assumed escalation on the annual costs of the regional conveyance system. So water authority default escalation. We'll cap it at 20 years, then 3.7%. Here's what happens to the red-black chart. We've now completely eliminated that 18 or 19 billion dollars of advantage that the black had. And we've now given a $1 billion disadvantage to the black. If we make one more change, which would be to adjust the transportation or exchange rate component to the actual 20-year average that the Water Authority showed you on one of their previous charts, and that's 4.5%. Now we have $6.5 billion of black versus $6.5 billion of red, $3+ billion of black. And the generational cost here is, well, not only is the project not cost effective, but once again, we have this very high certainty that the red bars are all real, and we're still in the range that the black bars are speculative. And it's just an incredibly risky investment when you make what we think are these reasonable assumptions on how this would actually play out. There's one further adjustment we would make. We think the Water Authority's assumptions of IID price escalation are overly optimistic. And if we make that change also, now you see that the black bars are getting pretty hard to see in the chart. And this is actually, Don and I think this is our best guess, professional judgment of what the economics and distribution of benefits and costs across generations look like for this project. Demand risks appear significant, despite the Water Authority's comments that they've looked at their own 2015 Urban Water Management Plan, and that plan says that there's plenty of demands. I think all of us that have followed water demands, and I know certainly as a retail agency, you follow water demands, and you've noted that your demands have not been as high as you predicted they would be in 2015. And so your finance people are always having to adapt to this. The chart here is another Water Authority chart that they've shown to their board a couple times. The blue line is the total regional water demands, and the red line is Water Authority sales. And the vertical distance between the red and the blue is local member agency supplies. And the red line occasionally takes a dip downward because new local supplies are projected to come online. And so even though the blue is going up, the red doesn't go up as much. We think the blue line, though, is way overstated. This initial slope of the blue line is based on an assumption from the 2015 Urban Water Management Plan that unit demands at the time were repressed by the Great Recession and mandatory conservation in 2015 and other factors, and that the unit demands would eventually return to normal by 2030. And that's why you see this inflection point in 2030. Well, with the benefit of hindsight of having 5 additional years of water use data, we can say with pretty high confidence now that that isn't the case, that those unit demands are not returning to some previous version of normal, that they're a new normal, and they're more likely to continue downward in the face of all the pressures and State Water Resources Control Board issues that are driving them downward than they are to go upward. And so we're going to adjust the chart here. We're going to take the second slope, the second half slope of the blue line, and make that the slope for the entire blue line. And so that brings it down, and that in turn drives the red line down, because remember, the distance between the red and the blue is the same. It's local supplies. So we bring the blue line down, that pushes the red line down. Now the red line, Water Authority sales, is in the range of 200 to 250,000 acre feet per year. This is an enormous risk for the project. It's completely overlooked in any of the work to date, and the Water Authority is in the midst of preparing a new demand forecast, and it'll be interesting to see. I think it's supposed to be out sometime later this year, and it'll be interesting to see what that says, and if in fact it supports the idea that it would be a good investment to build that much capacity in a regional conveyance system. Glenn, one last point. I'm just about done, I promise. We were asked by the member agency managers to consider one additional point of comparison. The Water Authority noted that you have to compare the regional conveyance system to local supplies or a met exchange option. So we're adding one more, and the option we're adding we call negotiated exchange, and it arises from the financial terms of the settlement offer that Metropolitan made to the Water Authority in December of last year. And those same financial terms were repeated in the Water Authority's counteroffer to Metropolitan. Now, those were rolled up in litigation settlement issues and whatnot, and that part of it is way beyond our scope of work. We're picking out just the financial terms to show you here. The offer was to base the escalation of the exchange rate on the Engineering News Record 20 Cities Construction Cost Index, which is the standard metric used to gauge construction costs. That index has a 20-year average escalation of 3.2%. And so we're going to plug that in to the Water Authority's detailed economic model and show you the results. First, though, I'm going to orient you to this new slide. You haven't seen this type of bar chart. Well, it's sort of the same as that previous vertical bar chart, and now we're turning the bars horizontally. You can see at the bottom the regional conveyance system, $34 billion, and MWD exchange ending 2047 is the Water Authority's point of comparison on the theory that they can't negotiate an extension of the MWD exchange agreement. And so after 2047, it all goes away and they go back to buying tier 1 met water. So here's the $18 billion advantage that they showed in their bar charts. And by the way, this is all of their data, all of their default assumptions. Here's that same set of default Water Authority assumptions with the negotiated exchange option added in. And it shows that that option would have a net present value advantage over the regional conveyance system of about $15 billion over a long period of time, another staggering amount of money. So this is an interesting contrast here between this analysis and the Water Authority's previous analysis. The Water Authority's basis for their numbers on the regional conveyance system are that metropolitan rates are going to escalate at 5.1%. Well, if metropolitan rates were going to escalate at 5.1%, then having them escalate at only 3.2% in a negotiated exchange agreement is just enormously beneficial. And it makes us think that really more attention should be given to this opportunity. We understand that one of the reasons why the Water Authority Board turned down the settlement offer was out of concern that Met could shift so much of its costs out of the commodity rates onto fixed charges that rates might escalate at less than 3.2%. But we really can't have it both ways. We can't be saying we don't like this because the rates might escalate at less than 3.2%, and then also say that we think rates are going to escalate at 5.1%, and that's why we should consider investing $6 billion of ratepayer money. With that, I'm finally going to turn it back over to Don for conclusions.
Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Our conclusions are that the draft study's findings of RCS technical feasibility appears reasonable, as does its estimate of project costs. The draft study's finding that the project is economically competitive with other supply and transportation options is not reasonable. We find the project to be substantially more costly than other options. Specifically, the project is not cost effective when evaluated using reasonable assumptions of Met price escalation. There is a significant risk of long-term water authority sales being insufficient to utilize the project's planned capacity. And a negotiated exchange option appears to have economic advantage. Next slide. Our recommendation is to refocus the long-term QSA supply planning. The technical and economic feasibility of the RCS have now been advanced to reasonable levels of planning certainty. It appears the larger QSA planning uncertainties facing the Water Authority now revolve around the extension of the IID supply and exchange and Met exchange agreements, the opportunity for a negotiated exchange agreement, and the consequences of a long-term Water Authority sales decline. Accordingly, it appears budgets and staffing schedules set aside for RCS investigations could be applied more productively to refining those more consequential planning uncertainties. And that concludes our presentation. We're happy to take questions.
Thank you, Doug and Dan. And I'm going to just start with each director. I'm going to ask you if you have any comments. Would you please, would you mind being first, Director Ellithorpe? Are you there?
Whoops, I was muted, sorry. I don't have any particular questions, President Evans.
All right, thank you. How about you, Director Hernandez?
No, I got information here.
Thank you. Director Sinella?
Yeah, I have a couple questions and maybe a comment, but either party can answer this if they happen to know the answer. But has there been any analysis? Let's fast forward 45 years and let's say that we have this system built and we come off of Met. Has there been any analysis as to what impact that might be on the remainder of Met's customers?
This is Dan. No, we haven't done that yet. I think that in the plan of finance that we would develop in Phase B, you start to look at a number of things, including what fixed costs may be put back onto the Water Authority. But I will tell you this at a very high level. What we pay for transportation right now to Metropolitan in 2020 is about $145 million a year. The extent to which that escalates at whatever you think is reasonable, and that's borne by other parties, you can kind of get a sense of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, is there any concern though, not just our fixed cost, but is there any concern that the government could step in if the cost of the commodity increased so much on the remaining customers that it's almost like a monopoly for businesses, right? That would cause the government to step in and prevent this from happening? Well, I mean, speaking for myself, I don't know that we went into that, but it certainly gets to if something is before you where you see increasing costs and you see one of your largest customers studying something that would
present a future where you forego $150 million, I would hope that that is a basis to sit down and talk about reasonable cost matters.
Okay, and kind of where I'm going with that, and both in with regards to the government maybe intervening and stopping the project altogether before it even gets started, and potentially reallocating and changing and the laws of the river, if you will, with regards to the other states, like Director Martin had mentioned. I mean, we've learned in recent years with the drought, 2-3 years ago, and now with the COVID-19 emergency, that the executive branches of the states and the federal government have enormous power. And when they either realize an actual crisis or a perceived crisis, they're going to take action. And it seems like everything else goes out the window. And I think we in San Diego County have seen that and suffered from that firsthand as it pertained to the drought a few years ago. And I suspect if the situation on the river and Lake Mead ever got so dire that they wouldn't hesitate to step in and take the appropriate action as well. And so that's a little bit concerning when we're looking at a project like this. And then I guess my last kind of question I have is I'm relatively new on the board. I've been on the board for about 5 years. And as you guys know, we are directly connected to the desal plant. And when I came on the board, our general manager at the time, he kept, it's so similar, the language. He kept talking about how we're in a long-term agreement with the desal plant, and that sometime over the next 25 or so years, those lines between the cost of desal water and imported water were going to cross. I don't know if I remember the exact timeline, exactly what was being said and pitched to the entire board back then. But what happens if that's even remotely true, 25, 40 years, that eventually and they said the same thing, that imported waters it was going up double digits every year, and et cetera, et cetera. The exact same argument that's being made today. What happens if desal is a lower cost option than our own water, even if we have our own independent conveyance system? Because based off of what we were told just 5 years ago when I first joined the board, it sounds like by the time you have your first drop of water going down this system, desal is going to be less money.
Yeah,
based off the annual year-over-year increases of imported water.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And my comment would be that certainly as Vallecitos knows, the cost of the plant is it can become $1, right, after the 30-year term. And of course, if you're just paying for O&M on the plant, that is absolutely going to be cheaper than any other source of supply. So, I think that's a valid point. I think you contrast that against, a real speculation on, will there ever be another desal plant in California? We know that one's in the making, but it's become increasingly more difficult to do those sorts of things. So, the QSA-based supply, it's relatively cheap. And, in terms of the escalators that were shown on the previous presentation, I don't agree with them in the least bit. I've been working on the IID rates and imported water for 15 years, and there's really no basis to take those rates down the way that they were in that previous presentation.
All right, thank you. That's all the questions I had, President Evans.
Thank you, Director Snella. Director Martin?
Yes. I have more of an observation, I guess, more than a question.
Could you speak a little louder for me, please?
I'm
Thank
sorry.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, when I spoke earlier about desalinization and more of a cure for 6 to 7 states, it was quickly presumed that desal water will be I don't know what that tapping noise is. It's not coming from me. That it would be $3 to $4 million would be the cost. I assume you've done a study on that, or you just pulled it out of the air. If you get the federal government involved, which I thought they were close to getting involved with 2 years ago with taking care of our water problem and throwing out all of the minutes, throwing out all of the state's junior and senior. If Arizona is going to run out of water, the federal government's not going to let that happen. So we need to find, rather than a Band-Aid approach, the Colorado River is running drier, and there's no other source of water coming to it. Now, we really need to think about doing something for San Diego County, as well as the other states, by building a larger desal plant to bring in the federal government. They've got lots of land in North County that they can attach a pipe from North County to Fallbrook to hook up to your 2 pipes coming down, which don't have to cross 200 miles of desert. And I think if you had the federal government involved, it would make a huge difference. And I think that's the way to go, personally. And I think you should take the off-ramp now and save the ratepayers the extra money you want to spend on this by looking at something larger scale.
Thank you, Director Martin. All right, anything else from either of the other 2 gentlemen? Okay, I'd like to say thank you to Dan and Doug for their report. It's interesting to me that although you're both doing a presentation on the same subject, you're taking the economic analysis in this latter presentation, which of course is difficult, but the real crux of the matter. And the Water Authority is saying, well, I think what I hear them saying is they need phase B so they can see about the economic part. At this moment in time, I find both of you making some interesting and valid points, but I still feel very poorly educated on making that decision. I think there's some missing figures and facts. I think I want to debate rather than 2 presentations, but debates aren't real popular, so I want to ask for that, but thank you both very much for your information. Really do appreciate it, and I really appreciate your time. And I know you've been on a tight schedule, and I wish that, or I hope perhaps the board will choose to give a little more time to this decision as far as the Water Authority is concerned, but we'll see on Thursday.
So President Evans, this
Yes.
is General Manager Prum.
Yeah.
I do have a few more slides.
Oh,
So
cool.
we're not quite done, but I have 2 more slides, and I want to turn it over to the board for any further discussion. So if I can ask Doug Gillingham to stop sharing his screen.
Okay, let me figure out how to do that. Glenn, previously when I hovered down at the screen, it would pop up the menu that let me do that.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna just.
Can you just steal it? Can you just share your screen and steal it from me?
I'm gonna try to steal it.
Okay.
Okay, can you see a new screen that says concerns with RCS? All right, this is just a couple of slides that kind of summarize my perspective, your general manager's perspective, and it's influenced by what I've heard from from the Water Authority, what I've heard from our consultants, and my own independent analysis. Some of it is, you'll see a lot of commonality, but I'll just go through them relatively quickly. So these are my concerns with the RCS. First of all, it does not provide any new water, and that's been addressed, but don't walk away from here thinking this solves water supply problems. It's dealing with the same water. It does not address any conveyance capacity issues. The existing Colorado River Aqueduct has adequate capacity to transport all of the Water Authority's QSA and canal lining supplies. It does not address what Metropolitan may do in the future. So, there's always, for every action, there's a reaction. If the Water Authority goes and builds a conveyance facility, we can't think that Metropolitan is just going to stay with their current rate structure. So whether they change fixed versus variable, or supply versus transportation costs, we have to consider what they may do in response to actions that we take. As Doug and Don's presentation pointed out, it raises significant affordability issues for decades to come. Even if you take the Water Authority's assumptions and run out that 92-year analysis, and you show this very large net present value benefit now. That still doesn't address how we're going to pay for it in those years where the lines are red and negative. So the next 40 years of ratepayers are going to be paying for this investment in the future, so that hopefully in the future there's a return on that investment and future generations see a benefit. The duration of the economic analysis is really long. And as much as we engineers and finance managers try to shine up that crystal ball, 92 years is a long time to look into the future and anticipate what interest rates and inflation and bond costs and everything will be. So it's very difficult. As was pointed out in our consultant's analysis, this analysis is very sensitive to the assumptions you make. I don't think the consultant pointed this out directly, but just changing the anticipated metropolitan exchange rate growth percentage rate over the years, going from 5.1% down to about 4.5%, which is a relatively minor change. It results in billions of dollars of difference in the net present value. And that's just one of a myriad of assumptions that were put into the analysis in there. We don't know what the MWD exchange rate will be. We don't know what bond rates will be at the time of construction, so it makes it difficult to analyze. Last page for mine is, and Doug touched on this, we're talking about known costs versus hopeful future benefits. Those red bars that you saw, those are coming. Those are costs that we're going to incur, and the long-term bet is that the black bars in the future far surpass those red bars. And you know, we all hope that that's the case, but we have to figure out, are we ready to make that bet at this point in time? I have significant bias towards really looking at the QSA transfer agreement and the MWD exchange agreements. A lot of things are happening at the same time. When you look at the timeline for the construction of the RCS, you're looking in that 2045 to come online perspective. That's right when the QSA agreement and the MWD exchange agreements under their current terms are set to expire. So I think it would make sense to be looking at those in earnest. And as Dan Denham pointed out, you're not doing one at the expense of the other. You can do multiple things. You can continue to study this project and still look at QSA transfer agreements and MWD exchange agreements. The next to last bullet, long-term water demands. I don't know where water demands are going to go. We've seen declining sales trends. Those are clearly going down. Doug mentioned those. We have increasing conservation mandates. It seems like every year, every 5 years for sure. We have local water supply projects that seem to be accelerating and will continue to accelerate as the price of imported water goes up. One thing Doug didn't show on his bar charts of the demands was the base loading. So if you looked at the QSA, the canal lining, and the desal, collectively, that's about 325,000 acre feet per year that are basically take or pay arrangements. We're paying for that water whether we take it or not. And if the water supply position in the future changes where our demands are less than 325, which is foreseeable, then we're paying for a commodity. We're paying to build a facility to convey a product that we don't need enough of. So when you start converting those known costs and dividing it by a lesser volume of water being transported, your costs per acre foot go way up. And my last sub-bullet on that, and nobody's mentioned it, is I think in the future we're going to get a mandate from the state that has what they call a zero liquid discharge requirement. And that means that wastewater treatment plants can't discharge anything into the ocean, which means, Senator Hertzberg proposed this, I think, in 2018, and it didn't get traction, but he's known for continually throwing the bill back into the mix until it gets traction. And if you try to factor in what those newfound water supplies are because of mandates, I think that changes the mix completely. Right now, people aren't converting all the the liquid waste to reusable water is because it's so expensive. But maybe it becomes more cost competitive because the alternative supply goes up, or it becomes a state mandate and you don't have a choice. You have to do it. So it's not I'm doing this because it's cheaper. It's I'm doing this because I have to. And I'm just running some numbers in my head, but I know the Encino Wastewater Authority had a regional study, and just the North County, small North County area, they anticipated about 20,000 acre feet of additional water supplies to the region because of converting 100% of their what would be discharged to the ocean to drinking water. And if you look at the city of San Diego and other wastewater treatment plants following suit, that's easily another maybe 75,000 acre feet per year. You start subtracting that from those water demands, and it's a very different picture. So I think we need to take a look at a realistic long-term look at the water demands and supplies. And I just threw the last one as the MWD exchange agreement coupled with the QSA agreements. We need to take a long, hard look at those. So those are my thoughts, and I'll turn it over to the recommendations right now. And this was in the staff report. So the first recommendation, you guys have done that already. You've heard the presentations, and you're obviously considering them and asking some thoughtful questions. And that's the second bullet, ask the questions. The third bullet, we would like you to provide Director Evans, President Evans, as our CWA director with your input. Now, the board does not direct how Director Evans votes at the Water Authority, but I'd like her to have the benefit of your thoughts, and you've started to do that already. And the last bullet before I turn it over to all of you is to consider a position letter. So regardless of Director Evans' comments at the Water Authority board meeting, our board has the option to decide whether they want to send a letter to that board meeting for the Water Authority's consideration. And that could be a support, it could be an oppose, it could be a let's delay this, it's moving too fast. But right now I need some direction as to whether we want to take a formal position to direct me to prepare a letter to submit to the Water Authority. And with that, I'll turn it back over to President Evans and the board.
Thank you, and thank you for your final analysis of it, General Manager Pruitt. So I would like to ask each of you, if you would please, to provide your input on what you would like me to do or to consider to do at the meeting on Thursday. And Director Sinella, would you be first, please?
Sure. Yeah, on the surface, I'm kind of, an independent-minded person and like the idea of having our own independent systems here in San Diego for our region. But the more and more I hear about this particular study and this particular project, there's so many unknowns and there's more questions than answers, it seems like. And we're forecasting so far out into the future that I really, truly do think that, at least at this point, we're throwing good money at a bad survey. And I also kind of walk away sometimes feeling like we're making this investment to almost bluff Met and put them and bring them and kind of bring them to the bargaining table. And I guess there could be an argument that there could be some value in doing that if we were able to successfully bring them to a more favorable agreement. But I don't think that's not what's being pitched right now. And so if that's part of the plan, I think we need to be at least maybe in closed session or something, there needs to be some sort of transparency around that, because what we're being asked right now to support is to make a kind of an initial investment to study this further. And I just don't see there being any value in further study at this point. So I'd be in favor of a letter of opposition.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Gentlemen, who else would like to speak? I hate to call on you if you're not ready, but I would really appreciate your input. Thank you, Director Hernandez.
Yes, I certainly would be interested, as you mentioned earlier, in delaying any decision. I mean, this is a lot of information. And much like when we have our rate studies, the opposition always has an engineering group challenging our numbers. And I would like to see a little more time with us, ensuring that we have a good idea of what our consultant, the 18 agency group, put together, so that the decision we make has a great foundation. So I would like to see this delayed and a letter of opposition, or not a letter of opposition, a letter identifying a delay for a couple of months on this so that we could all get a better handle on these numbers.
Thank you. All right. Director Elitharp?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Director Hernandez. I don't think there's any big hurry to make a decision to go forward with Phase B. I'd like to keep an open mind on this project, but our MAM consultant provides some pretty compelling arguments against the project, and I'm not as strongly supportive of a letter of opposition, but I could support that if the rest of the board wants to do that.
All right, thank you. And Director Martin?
Yeah, I would support a letter of opposition.
Oh, you'll have to speak up for me.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now?
I can. I
I would
apologize.
support a letter of opposition at this point, brought up by what everyone on our board I've said. At this time, there's no rush to do this, but the Water Authority, as we said in the beginning, once they start a snowball, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and you can't stop it. And I think that if you derail it at this point for further study, it makes sense. The two sides are completely, and they're not sides, Water Authority versus the MAMS people, are completely separate in their numbers. And that makes no sense for us to move forward at this time.
So you're suggesting that the letter of delay to gather more information?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thank you. And in that letter of delay, or in my presentation of that, do we have specific things that we would like mentioned in it, and specifically that you would like clarification on? Or is it all of what General Manager Prum has put in his final roundup analysis?
I think that General Manager Prum, as well as the MAM advisors, have put up a great argument. I'd like to see some true answers to those arguments. And you hit it on the nose. You need a big debate on this because it's not, it's going to be he said, she said. And you don't really want that. You want something that gives us a definitive answers to which one is correct.
All right. Thank you. I think I heard the message. So anyone else want to add anything else to that? Director Pruitt, did you get direction? General Manager Pruitt?
Yeah, so I heard feedback, but I didn't hear it unanimous. So I just want to clarify. I did hear some opinions about letters of opposition, and I heard numerous about a delay, request to delay. And it doesn't mean we can't combine those two to say we oppose it unless it's delayed. If you're going to vote on August 27th, we're a no. If you're willing to postpone the vote in order for us to get answers to some of the concerns and questions that we have, then our mind is still open. If the board's okay with that type of approach, we can put together a letter that kind of addresses both approaches. But it's possible that they may say, no, we're voting today. So it'd be nice for them to know what Vallecitos' position is if they vote on August 27th.
Yeah, I would agree with the general manager, and who's going to continue looking into the? Is our independent consultant? Are they finished? Or are they going to? We can delay all we want, but what more research is anybody on this board or our staff going to do between now and say October?
Was that directed to me?
What's that plan? Because I'm not familiar with the agreement with the terms with our independent consultant on this, and I don't know if their report concludes their service to us, or are they going to continue weeding this out, and they're going to all of a sudden find something new that they haven't found yet, and they're going to convince us that this is now a good idea.
No, I think they're pretty done. I think they fulfilled their scope. So that doesn't mean we can't amend their scope and have them do additional analysis for us with a focus area. Maybe they can continue to support us in working side by side with the Water Authority, which they've done. Our consultant has done a great job. And to the Water Authority's credit, so have they. They've been very open and transparent, sharing their model, and meeting with our consultant. They haven't hid their cards or anything. So I think there's space to continue that discussion. And I, quite frankly, don't understand the urgency to meet and decide on August 27th.
If I think maybe the oppose with without delay or a very specific request is what we need to ask. And I don't know that I need the consultants, the independent consultants, to come forward with any further analysis. I think, and I agree, I don't think the Water Authority is coming from a totally reckless position. I think they've thought about it a lot, and I think there is a lot of potential possibilities in it. But the problem for me right now, and I think it's the problem for our board as well, is we're talking about decades of commitment on generations without really the facts. And I would really appreciate it if the Water Authority was willing to address specifically some of the points that have been brought up in the report by Doug and Dan. I know Dan Denham had said at the beginning that he said, you know, I've only been given, staff's been assigned this by the board and not that. I go back to the meeting when we first had this come forward, and it was even a feeling of rush at the time, and everyone was adamant that they wanted a dropping off point because they were afraid of the snowball effect that we've all talked about. So I appreciate that the Water Authority is trying to be, is willing to work and is transparent, but I think we need to say to them, we need more to go on, or they need to define what phase B is. If phase B is, we're going to answer the questions brought up in by this consultants, that's different than if phase B is running around trying to establish partnerships and find out how much it'll cost to drill under a mountain or something like that. So there's my concern. I'm not sure baby out with the bath.
If I can, just a point of clarification in our letter that we're discussing. So we're going to ask, so basically we're going to say something along the lines that if you're going to make a decision in August, then we oppose. We oppose moving forward. We're asking for more time, but if you're going to use that more time to analyze your current plan phase B, then we're opposed. But if you're going to use that time to analyze a different plan B and you're going to change the definition of your phase B, then we're open-minded. That's what I heard. That's what I heard you say, Director Evans. Is that correct?
Yes, I do. I think right now we don't really know what phase B is. I think it's speculative. So I agree with you.
Well, we have the Water Authority here. I thought in their opening part of their presentation they were very clear about what they believe phase B is going to be. So maybe while we're there, we could ask them right now if there's any appetite whatsoever to redefine phase B.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so this is Dan. I think a couple things. A lot of what you're describing as your concerns, if I may, they're a reaction to the consultant's report. The consultant's report is largely what we intend to look at in phase B. So rescoping phase B would produce essentially the deeper dive, another look at exactly what Doug and Don have done. Now you have to understand, I've said this a couple of times now, our board directed us to not do that and not go there with A. And it's not only the board, it was the member agency managers. I mean, I can pull up the letter that clearly says, don't do the deep dive. And so those are my constraints, and I can't, recreate the past with what we were told to do with phase A and phase B. So, I understand there's a difference of opinions, and I think that's fair. We're all professionals. I don't take anything personally. That's where it is. I think one of the directors just said, what would we learn if we delayed? Well, I suppose that, Doug and Don could do further analysis and the scope could be adjusted to learn more. And I suppose that, the Water Authority could do some more work for a few months. But I think we're at a point where there's just really a fundamental decision to make, which is, this is a small incremental step and a continued look at a large term planning process. It's not drilling under the hill, if you will, within a year. There's no way that can happen. There's no way that we can extend the QSA contracts overnight. And so it kind of gets to those things that are really way down the line. And, I just don't see them as a near-term thing to be concerned about. And that's just my opinion.
Dan, could I ask you how many phases are you aware of that we're planning to do?
I'm sorry, Director Evans, could you repeat that? I think my phone was cutting out.
I'm sorry. How many phases are you aware of that the Water Authority and you've been directed we're willing to do? Is it phase A and then phase B and then we decide? Or are there 4 more jumping off points?
The only thing that we've discussed, whether it's with the board officers, the Colorado River Work Group, or the board officers and chairs, that those 3 groups constitute, a good portion of the leadership at the Water Authority. It's strictly phase A, phase B. I can't tell you what the future holds if something's discovered in phase B. That someone were to say, oh, that looks interesting, that partnership opportunity, and maybe that partnership opportunity involves storage in North County, right? That is a part of phase B. So I can't predict what future phases would be, but in a very straightforward way, what I will tell you that, of course, if this project was to proceed past phase B, there would be additional off-ramps and different points along the way where the Water Authority could walk away from this.
Okay, and I don't have any information yet for the coming board meeting, so I'm going to ask you, is this phase B also coming with a monetary amount attached as phase A did?
The phase B budget is 1.3 million, and it was already approved as part of our last budget process. It's contained in the CIP. So the board is not being asked to approve additional money. It's already in the budget, in the rates, if you will. So it's simply a go, no go decision on that money or on that phase.
Okay, and we'll certainly have a discussion at the board meeting and we'll decide what phase B is going to be if there's going to be a phase B, right?
Right. And so the Black and Beach report and summary, the final report is posted on the Water Authority's website today. The Water Authority board and general managers got that email today. Just in terms of what's next, we'll be looking to meet with the Colorado River Work Group, who has shepherded this sort of thing from start to finish on Monday. And
right. Okay.
yeah, and then it'll go to the board on Thursday of next week.
All right. I think that answers my question. Thank you. All right.
So President Evans, it's Glenn again. I just want to clarify that you got the input you need from the other 4 directors. Good. And collectively, it sounds like we have a good idea of what the letter is going to say that I'm going to put together.
I feel like I do. How about, gentlemen, do you have, or Mr. Gilpin, are you ready to say something?
Well, procedurally, I think you ought to decide, take a vote as to whether you want Director Prum to issue a letter to the Water Authority, because you've discussed it. I'm not sure.
Oh, you would like
what your
a motion?
vote on that is. I think that's prudent.
As usual, it's clear as mud.
Welcome to the general manager's world.
Well, there's an action item on the Water Authority's agenda for next Thursday at 7.6. for a regional conveyance study, and it's defined as an action item. So
Right.
if you're going to oppose that action item or comment on it, then Glenn would need some direction.
All right. I would like to ask, if you don't mind, Director Sinella, you did a good job of putting it in succinctly. If you would not mind making a motion.
Yeah, I'm going to make them. And I want to first say, I appreciate both of the presenting parties. And Dan, your last comments were really, I think, honest, and I appreciate that. And so the motion is going to be that General Manager Pruin will draft a letter that will oppose the moving forward to Plan B if they're going to make that decision at their next meeting. With you can word craft this as you need to, Glenn, but with the caveat that if they are willing to postpone it to allow for more analysis and information, that we would be supportive of that.
Second, Martin.
Oh, thank you. Been moved and seconded that the general manager will draft a letter to the CWA in which we would oppose Plan B if it was presented with an immediate as-is without modification, with time for more information and clarification, I think.
If they're going to make a decision at that meeting, at the next meeting, then we're in opposition. We're open to pursuing a delay to allow for more analysis and consideration.
Now, so it's been moved and seconded. Before we take a vote on that, I just want to throw out an option. If at this particular meeting in phase B, it clarifies very distinctly that they will answer the concerns that have been presented from the independent consultants before they move on to other items, so we can feel like we've answered this. Is that something would you feel comfortable with approving that if it was very specifically stated? I don't know exactly how the wording would have to be. I'm just asking, or is it no unless they delay it?
For me, it's no unless they delay it. But and again, I don't think that it'd be interesting to see where the other 17 agencies fall on this. But of course, they're going to use some time within phase B to address the independent, analysis and report, right? I mean, they have to. But is it going to drive any change? That's the question, right? And in the meantime, we're spending a lot of money, and we're moving forward for something that, for all of the concerns that we mentioned tonight, and all the concerns that our independent consultant mentioned, may end up being all for naught. And that's the ultimate concern, right? That we don't want to throw good money at a bad, survey or a bad plan. And so, at what point do we take that off ramp? And that's what this discussion's all about. Do we take the first off ramp, or do we take the second one, or do we take the third one or the fourth one? But each one costs a little bit more money. And so, I'm just not convinced that I think the water authorities and the different groups that are looking at this, there's different motives, but also they like their plan. They want to move forward, and I'm not convinced just one board member out of the 5 of us and all the different ones involved with the other 17 agencies that got the independent consultants. I personally am not convinced that this plan is going to work out for a number of reasons, and I'm not willing to go down to the second and third off ramp, but to be supportive of what the board wants. I'm open-minded to give you guys some more time, but we do this as a board on even with our own internal decisions that we have to make. We always kick the can down the road, and I think this is just going to be the more time we add to this, it's just more money for our ratepayers that's going to be spent.
Thank you.
My
Okay.
question?
Yes,
Question?
Director Martin.
My question is pretty simple. I know we have to be very specific when we write letters, especially the County Water Authority, as far as intent. Our intent here is to say no unless they answer all the questions that we have. So unless it comes back to us again, the answer is no.
All right. Would you
Just
like
put
to
it
take,
off to the next meeting? They can put it off to, we won't do this meeting, we'll do it next meeting. We'll look at it.
Well, we have a motion and a second, so I think we have to address that at some point.
Right, let's vote.
let's vote. Okay. So it's been moved and seconded, and we're taking a roll call vote. Director Ellithorpe,
Yes.
Director Hernandez,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Sinella.
Yes.
And President Evans, before you vote, I'm going to ask General Counsel Gilpin, would it be a conflict for
Me to
President
vote.
Evans to vote on it and be the rep? Or can she vote on the motion? You're muted, Jim.
She can vote on the motion because the motion is to send an opposition letter from Vallecitos.
Okay.
Okay, vote yes. So it's passed unanimously. Okay. Again, thank you to both sides for your time and efforts and energy. It's been very appreciated.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Safe drive home.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on now. That's the end of our action items, and we'll go to reports by the GM.
Nothing tonight.
All right, District Legal Counsel.
Yes, just briefly. It's been a long night, I know. I just wanted to remind the board. This has become an increasing topic on conflicts of interest, and there are two different types of conflicts of interest. I simply wanted to point out. Ones are under the Political Reform Act, and then there are what is called a 1090 conflict of interest, meaning if the district enters into a contract or agreement that one of you has a quote unquote financial interest in, that agreement can be voided, meaning the person who we entered into the contract with would lose the advantage of that contract. And the other ramifications can be pretty far reaching. So I would just encourage folks, if you think you have some interest in a contract or agreement, i.e., you have some interest, the people, there's some tangible benefit you might receive, might get, then please consult me, and so we can go through it and see if one of the exceptions applies. 1090 is kind of a draconian area that is really complicated, vague, etc. So, but it does have consequences to the district distinct from what you typically think of under the Political Reform Act. You can't recuse yourself and let the rest of the board vote on it. It's an imputed conflict. So if somebody says, I'll recuse myself, and the board goes forward with it under 1090, there would still be a violation and the contract would be void. So it's significant.
Thank you.
I have a quick question of legal counsel. Hey, Jim, first off, thanks. I think that's an important topic, and I'm hoping it was just a kind of a general awareness that you're bringing this up with all the water districts that you serve. Is that the case, or is there a specific reason why you're bringing that up? I just don't want to mislead anybody who watches the video and who might think you're bringing that up for a particular reason. Because my understanding and belief is that you're just bringing it up as part of general awareness, right?
Yeah, I'm just bringing it up as general awareness. Thank you, Director Sinella. It's become an increasing area of challenge through the FPPC, and it's just something we want to remind people of. I've noted with my clients, there's kind of a general confusion that, hey, if I have a conflict, I just accuse myself. And there are situations where that is not always the case. So it's just a general reminder, and I appreciate you pointing that out because I'm not flagging anything. So
okay, great, thank you.
Unintentionally or intentionally.
Thank you. Is that it, Mr. Gilpin? Yes.
That's everything. Thank you,
All
President
right,
Evans.
Well, the San Diego County Water Authority has a meeting next Thursday, as you know, and we've discussed what it will be about. So that's the end of my discussion on that. Encina Wastewater Authority.
Yes, we had our capital committee this morning, and I'll abbreviate it. The capital improvement plan on the primary area improvements continues. The cogeneration building, which is the one that had the deteriorating beam and columns, they've got half of it done. And my goodness, that really was a mess. So they're moving ahead with that. And that's the report.
Thank you. And Policy Finance Committee?
We have our board meeting on the 26th of this month, next week.
Thank you. And standing committees?
Yes, the engineering committee met. We discussed the seepage possibility, septage, not seepage, septage, and update on our solar. And I don't have the minutes, the agenda in front of me, I don't think.
Yeah, you also discussed the year-end CIP and the development services update.
Oh, yes. And that will be delivered sometime in the future to the board.
Thank you. Anything else with standing committees?
No, we had no finance committee meeting.
Okay. Well, then, directors' reports on meetings, conferences, seminars, or web seminars. Anyone?
Just a quick question on the finance committee. Are we going to have one in August?
Yeah, we're planning one for August 24th. We're going to reach out tomorrow and check the availability of the 2 committee members. That's next Monday.
I can make it.
I can make it.
Okay, it'd be 4 o'clock our customary time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, then that would be the end of the reports. Is there any other business regarding meetings or for the good of the order?
Well, we had the CASA conference on the 12th and 13th. I don't know, I attended. I don't know if anybody else was there, but I had an impossible connection task, so I've reviewed the presentations in a PowerPoint presentation.
So you had a hard time connecting with them?
No, I had an impossible time connecting.
Oh.
I think I might direct Diane to ask for a refund.
Oh, that's too bad.
Martin also attended CASA.
Yes.
Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday we had a welcome from the new incoming president, Bill Long, and then we had a great national economic forecast session in the wake of COVID-19, which is very insightful, I thought. And then the panel consisted of COVID impacts later in the day. And then welcome Vice President Jason Dow on Thursday. Interesting leading, we spoke to a Cassandra Pye, and she's leading, I'm trying to read my notes here. Yeah, anyhow, she's a lead consultant on impacts of COVID-19. So it's real all about COVID-19, but very interesting that long-term effects that they think we're going to be seeing. Long-term effects.
Wow. Is there any one specific you could share with us?
No, I'm not a doom and gloomer, so I don't repeat those things.
Okay.
It didn't look good.
All right, there we go. All right.
President Evans,
Yes.
I attended several meetings, and I'll just go through a list of them. I'm not going to go into detail unless somebody has questions.
Great.
So on the 22nd of July, I attended a CWEA webinar on COVID-19, overcoming O&M challenges. On the 27th, I attended the Aqua JPIA board meeting. I attended the Aqua Summer Conference on the 29th and 30th, the Aqua Water Quality Committee on the 11th of August, and I also attended the CASA Summer Conference.
Excellent. Any particular item you'd like to share?
The one presentation of note, and I'd pass it along to Glenn, is that the Aqua Summer Conference, there was an excellent, what I thought was an excellent presentation by the Human Resources Director at Aqua JPIA on knowledge transfer for people that are retiring, going out the door, that have 25, 30 years of experience. It's probably one of the best presentations I've heard on that. So I would encourage Glenn to get a copy of that. It had some real good specifics on how to capture that knowledge.
Wow, thank you. I always find the JPIA fascinating. Their
It was
presentation.
really good. It was probably the best one I've heard on that subject.
That's great. Somebody's going to want to retire one of these days, so we need all that info. All right, gentlemen, I think we are ready to adjourn the meeting unless there's any reason not to. Thank you all for your patience, and you too have a great night.